Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny.
Happy Saturday. Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. I am your host, Chris Carr.
And I am Kristen Johnson, and happy Saturday.
Ooh. And technical gremlins almost got us. So sorry for the delayed start. Boy, there's always something sometime.
There's always something.
So I hope everybody's getting ready for the holiday, that being Halloween.
Samhain,
Samhain is actually how we say it. And I'm sure a lot of you know that. But we like to call it salmon. Happy salmon.
Yeah.
A hail Hecate and happy Saturday.
There you go. Nice.
Everyone's a witch in October, wouldn't you say? It seems to be the trending thing. However,
sure,
we are a bit witchy year round. So hope you guys are doing well. And I see a couple of folks out there. Here's Greg Koss.
Hey, Greg.
What's going on? He says happy salmon as well. Happy salmon, Greg. Loved your show last night on the Shadow Hour with Bruce Holliday. And he brought up an interesting thing. We were just talking about this before the show, too. Like, he talked about how he's not as into, say, quote unquote, paranormal and being a paranormal investigator as he is being someone who has spirit communications. And that's so in the ballpark for us as well. You know, as much as we love a good haunted house, I mean, I think our whole real bag, you know, is really about trying to communicate with the things that haunt it.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, my tab's closed. I had to reboot, but we've got a great guest for you today. Her name is Vicki Joy Anderson, and we're going to bring her right on. And she researches sleep paralysis, a subject where we see, lines crossing. We often talk about hypnagogic, hypnopompic states and those sort of things, and alien abduction phenomena, incubi, succubi phenomena occurs in these astral projection. So interesting, and she has a new book out. She's going to tell us all about it. It's called They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis. And let's bring her right on. Get to things.
Hey, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me on. This is going to be great.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to be really fun.
A topic that's near and dear to our hearts because we see all these parallels with other phenomena. You know, sleep paralysis is something that most people experience. And we just want to get into talking to you about it. So what drew you to sleep paralysis? It's research.
I was drawn to it. It came for me. So it's something that has just been a part of my life for pretty much my whole life. I think it started around 2 years old, but my first very clear, vivid memories of it was around 4 years old, based upon the house that I was living in at the time. You know, you always remember that green shag carpet from the 70s, right? So, so my first memory of it had also included some out of body stuff, because unlike a lot of sleep paralysis where they're pinned to the bed and they can't move, my very first memory of it, I got up out of my body and ran towards the door. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to talk about this stuff because, you know, the horror movie and the genre and the heavy metal have sort of beaten the topic to death, to the point that some of this stuff sounds now very cliche. But when you're actually encountering it, especially when you're 4 years old and you have no idea, it is actually very terrifying. And so it was literally, I made a bolt for the door, and the door slammed, and a voice in my head, oh, your parents will never get you. You know, literally, it was the whole like horror movie shebang, right? But it was terrifying. And so that kind of continued for many, 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 many years. And it sort of was exacerbated during the years that I was having a lot of surgery. And a lot of people, if you really get into the nuts and bolts of people who are willing to share these stories with you, a lot of them will get down to some sort of childhood trauma. They'll talk about some sort of abuse, some sort of ritual abuse, some sort of sexual abuse. And in some cases, it could be an adoption or losing a parent, or it could be, in my case, I was born with a birth defect and I had surgeries from 10 days old till I was about 15 or 16. And so you've got all of this energy, so we know that a lot of this stuff, we know that we can draw entities to us through our energy, willingly or unwillingly. And they're drawn to energy levels that are negative. So trauma, fear, terror, anger, rage, as well as sexual energy, because that's also a very powerful draw. And so I think my theory is that they were drawn to me because I had a lot of trauma. I had a lot of fear in my life. I had a great upbringing and I had wonderful parents and my home was safe. But everywhere else I went wasn't real safe because it was either a hospital or a doctor's office, or it was a school where kids can be cruel. So I think that was really a big part of it. And as I got older and sort of started figuring out some of these things, as you mitigate your anxiety and as you mitigate depression and as you mitigate anger towards other people, like it really, once you kind of can control your emotions, it's like the battery power kind of sinks to low levels, and I would have less and less of it. But that's why I think a lot of people will say that they have it during really stressful periods in their life. It could be, a parent is sick, or a change in jobs. A lot of people will talk about having it when they relocate somewhere. And anything like that. Puberty, you hear a lot about that too, where kids that go through puberty get it.
I think there's an emotional connection there. So when you're experiencing these high levels of emotion, that acts as sort of a beacon to the spirit realm, if you will.
Absolutely. There's different, we have all these different terminologies for it, like the occult and the new age and like science and medicine and the church. They all have different language for this, but they are all kind of saying the same thing. And so I kind of go with the Robert Monroe. He talks about in his Far Journeys trilogy, he talks about the loosh. And that's something that I couldn't use that analogy in the past, but there are so many intellectually aware people now that are familiar with his work and know without having to have it explained what that loosh is. And but we even do see aspects of that even in scripture. There's this fascinating phenomenon in the Bible, the Christian literature. There's 365 verses that say do not fear. And it's talked about in the church like that's just kind of like a recipe for having a good day. Don't be afraid, or it's almost sort of trivialized. Don't be afraid, there's nothing to be afraid of. And I'm like, I don't know what planet you live on, but there's plenty of things to be afraid of. But I think what's really behind that warning isn't like, if you're afraid, you don't have faith and you're a bad Christian. Then I think what he's really saying there is there are a lot of things behind the veil. There's a cosmic war going on, and there has been for the ages. We're kind of cannon fodder in the middle of it, and fear will give away your hiding spot. That gives away your coordinates. And so I think a lot of things that the church has sort of dumbed down and just put into categories of good and bad, or sinful, bad Christian, good Christian. There is so much supernatural, paranormal, and cosmic purposes behind what a lot of those verses are there for that I think the average pew warmer misses.
I agree. And just to circle back on Robert Monroe, we are big fans of Hemisync, which he founded, for those that don't know, and which is really a way to adjust your brain frequency that you're running at to get into more trance-like states. And he pioneered some books. I believe he was one of the first people writing about how to astral project, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, he was responsible for the gateway phenomena that, people have had such intense experiences that the CIA investigated it. So I wanted to let people know, Andy Mercer, from Paranormal UK and author himself, says Hemisync is fantastic. And a question out here real fast. Our friend Greg Koss says, did you experience this during your surgery when you were out?
That's a great question. When I had my surgeries, there was only one experience I ever had during surgery. And it was very interesting. And it really kind of plays into, obviously when you have surgery, you're dealing with really heavy medication. So you're now introducing mind altering substances to the equation. I was about 5 years old, and what happens in children's hospitals, at least back in the day, is they would come to kind of soothe your fears beforehand, and they'd come into your room the night before the surgery with the anesthesiologist, and the anesthesiologist would kind of explain, like, we're going to put a mask and this is going to happen and it's not scary. And, they do what they can to, these kids are freaking out. Right. So at this point, at 5 years old, I'd already had many, many surgeries by then. So like, I already, I could have given the guy speech for him. So at this particular time, the anesthesiologist came in and he's like, we're going to put the mask over, and then you're going to see yourself in a spaceship. And at 5 years old, I had this cynical little inner monologue, and I'm like, what is this guy talking about? This guy is crazy. And because I don't dream when you have anesthesia and then you wake up, like, what happened? What hit me? Right. And so I was literally, so I was literally, as this guy was explaining, you're going to be on a spaceship flying through space. I'm like, what is this issue? And so I was just kind of perplexed over what he was talking about. Well, this was in the late 70s. It was probably around 79, something like that. And so maybe I was around 7 or 8 at this time, because I was a pro. I'd had enough of these surgeries where I knew the deal, right? And so I had just seen, prior to this surgery, that old 1970s movie, The Black Hole. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that.
I do. I remember, but I haven't seen it in so long. I
it had the little like robot guy, and I just remember it being so sad at the end because he was like separated from his little robot, and I don't know. So it was sort of a traumatic movie for me, because as an empath, the ending was very sad for me. So I have surgery the next day, and they administer the anesthesia, and as I'm drifting off to sleep, lo and behold, I am on a spaceship. And I couldn't believe it. Well, so anyway, the imagery that my brain is providing is this black hole movie, and I'm on that ship, and the ship is going to blow. And so my parents are both on the ship with me, and they're like, get into the little escape pod, right? And I'm thinking in my mind that all 3 of us are going to get in the escape pod, and whatever. And so I get in the escape pod, and I turn around, to like say to my parents, like, oh, we made it. And they're not there. And I look up and I see them in the porthole of the mothership waving goodbye to me. Like I'm going to be eternally separated from them. So it was a terrorizing vision for, a 7-year-old as I'm drifting down into sleep. And I've thought about that, Greg, I've thought about that experience a lot through the years, thinking like that premonition was, what was the word I'm trying to think of? It was like, it was planted, because what if he had said, you're going to be, at a parade or on a Ferris wheel, or, and so that really got me very interested in the whole study of like pharmakia, the Greek word where we get our word pharmacy. It doesn't mean drugs, it means sorcery. The Greek word for sorcery is pharmakia. And so there has always been this link between various psychedelics and the ability to astral project and the ability to thin that veil and to talk to the spirit realm. And nowadays our modern, we've got the ayahuasca and that people are talking about. So It's not just sleep paralysis is only one of many portals to these realms. And I don't even think we're dealing with just the astral realm anymore either. I think now, and this is not my wheelhouse, I can't talk intelligently about it, but I'm starting to kind of read up now on the metaverse, because I've had a couple people come to me saying, I think I've had sleep paralysis. And when they talk about it, it's not an astral. It's very much more like a metaverse. It's more of a quantum technological, almost created by man sort of universe. And like I said, it's not my wheelhouse, but
sounds like it may speak to like simulation theory and that kind of
yes.
Not familiar with it either, but we'll look into that. I've heard the term, of course, and Facebook is now called Meta, but that's a whole different
or is it?
Or is it? Exactly. Right? So I have to wonder. That's interesting. I've talked about this on the show before, but I had an astral experience where I was already asleep and then projected. And it was so strange. Being, somebody who as I'd had a lot of astral experiences, I was well aware of that feeling of leaving the body and what that was like. And I was in this dream, and I kind of like took a nap. Frankly, for whatever reason, felt tired, and I could feel myself leave. And I came back, and I won't go into all the details and have the time of that, but I came back within the dream, and then dreamt some more and then woke up. So it was like this separate experience, which was very strange. And I was flying during the astral projection and all that, just like, you would on any other astral projection, but it was layers deep. And actually, why I thought of that was I was going down a street, like a town I've never been, but somehow seemed a little familiar. And I noticed that the buildings and all were slightly pixelated, which wasn't the case for the rest of the dream.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think, geez, there's something to this, or like simulation theory or something. It was like, why am I seeing a pixelated environment? So maybe does that have anything to do with the meta?
Yeah. Oh man, I could go in so many directions with that. We were talking very briefly before the show. What I'm finding is that a lot of the people that are contacting me saying, "Oh, I've never been able to talk about this. I've got to tell you my story." It started out with all the typical shadow people and the old hag and the red-eyed glowing demons and all this stuff. But what I'm getting more and more and more of, almost to the point where it's now overriding the classic sleep paralysis experiences, are people are explaining very quantum and technological visualizations during the sleep paralysis experience. And just as a side note, I use the word visualizations. I'm a grammar geek. I was an English major. And so words, I pick my words very carefully. If you actually look up hallucination in the dictionary, it is it's a visualization of something that's not really there. And I just think that that's a form of gaslighting. I mean, people that have had these paranormal experiences, who have had sleep paralysis, I think that they're seeing what's really there. Now, what I think is interesting is where's there? Like, are we really in our bedroom? Are we in the astral? So I think, I'm not always sure that I know where we really are when these things are happening, but they're not hallucinations in the grammatical linguistic sense that we're imagining things. That's just kind of almost a more clinical way of saying that someone's delusional. You're seeing these things, or you must be drunk, or any one of us that have had these experiences, we get that. Well, you must have really been asleep, or well, you must have been drinking, or
Sure, it's easy to pigeonhole right off.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to do that, because I know WebMD. I think it was WebMD. Yes. I looked up sleep paralysis on there, and they kind of play it down, and then they say, well, we don't really know why it happens, aside of like the chemical reactions in your body.
And it was a doctor that actually said that.
Yeah.
On the web, an easy access thing like WebMD, I think it was them, and it was going on, and kind of just it alludes that it's just kind of made up, like, well, and we don't know what it is. Well, that's not very helpful, right? If you're trying to say
research,
why am I having experience with shadow beings or whatnot?
Yeah, right. Well, I think they know exactly what it is, and they just don't want to touch it with a 1,000-foot pole. But and I always say this, and I know it makes my churchy friends squeamish, and sorry, but the fact is, when it comes to sleep paralysis, the only people who are really willing to call it out for what it really is people in the occult or the New Age, people who actually practice it. Medicine won't tell you what it really is. Science won't tell you what it really is. And even the church, it's not that they won't tell you what it really is, but they only tell you what half of it is or what part of it is. They don't acknowledge any of the physiological aspects, of which there are many. And they also don't really provide a lot of helpful solutions. It's kind of only seen through the lens of what are you doing to provoke this, and what sort of hidden sins do you have to confess? And and I understand the whole thing, like opening doors, we can open doors, and I get that, but it's not very helpful when you're having an experience that you can't explain and that's off-putting to you. And this is kind of where my research, like who I'm writing to, is I'm not writing to people who are adept in this and who are familiar with Monroe's work and who are intentionally seeking this out and have purposes for it. I'm talking about the people where this is happening to them and they didn't seek it out and they don't know why it's happening and they don't want it to happen. And so those are more of the people that are coming to me. And so when these people go to the doctor, they're being shut down or they're being medicated. And when they go to the church, they're being told that they're, bad, sinful, hypocritical people. And so kind of the tagline that I have as I'm talking about this topic is, it's time that science and the church gets intellectually honest about this particular topic. Let's admit it's real. There's too many thousands of people out there talking about it. We can't keep doing that. Like, we have to evolve into something more than you're crazy, you're schizophrenic. Like, let's have an intellectually honest discussion. We're living in an age of disclosure. If I can go onto Gaia.com and learn about the Akashic records and Atlantean sunken societies, then we can talk about people who have creepy experiences in their sleep. I mean, come on, let's grow up here.
Absolutely. Religion always tries to dictate what the experience is, what's going to happen when you die, and all of that. And we certainly believe in an afterlife, but we don't think that any particular religion is going to give you the exact details. And if once you go outside those details, and it kind of breaks the Bible, if you will. And now what? I don't know what to say. Andy Mercer says, any sort of experiences, we can become non-locational, i.e., not a set place or time, or time is certainly different. Anne-Marie Young's agreeing with us. What would you tell somebody that says, hey, I'm having these issues with sleep paralysis, I keep seeing a demon and I don't know what to do about it? If they're outside like that without the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, this is there's kind of two categories here, because there's people that are seeking this. There's people who are learning, like, I want to learn how to do this. So obviously those people aren't looking to figure it out or get rid of it. But so for the people where it's happening to them and they're like, I never asked for this, and this is terrifying and it's affecting my sleep now. And there are people that write to me that are tormented, they're being harassed, and some of these experiences can be cool, even the ones that are scary. When you reflect on them, it's like, what was that? I mean, we have a natural curiosity about these sorts of things, but for the people that are being tormented and harassed, it's a whole different scenario, because these people are trying to get rid of it. And a lot of the things that people do to try to close the doors actually just opens more of them. And so it really does take some discernment and some testing of these spirits, because we all know, whether you're looking at it through a biblical lens or through a New Age lens, either side will admit to you there are things in the spirit realm that are nefarious, and there's things that are there to help you. And they don't always wear the uniform that you're expecting, and they have there's confusing layers about it, because we have a situation where let's take the biblical model first. When angels are coming down from the throne room, they're coming down from the third heaven, they're bearing good, glad tidings of great joy. The most common first words out of every angel's mouth is, fear not, do not be afraid. So here's a situation where they're running into a being that is supposedly good, and they're terrified. And then we have the opposite, where people are running into very low vibrational wolves in sheep's clothing type of beings in the astral, but they're presenting as angels of light. And even scripture says that, like that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. And so I always tell people, you have to test these spirits, but you can't just, your emotional response cannot be the single solitary litmus test, because a lot of lower vibrational or evil or demonic beings can make you feel great, and they can make you feel emotions. I mean, all they have to do is flip a few switches and your dopamine goes wild, and and they have that ability. And then a lot of times we have experiences in the more church areas where people have encounters, and they talk about how terrifying it is. If you look in the biblical examples, when Isaiah and Elijah and John and Daniel had visions from God or from heaven or from angels, they talked about being physically ill, throwing up, fainting, being sick for days after, being perplexed. And so we do have to test the spirits to see if they're good or they're bad. And we have to have a litmus test that's far more robust than just whether or not we felt good or we felt scared.
Sure. Yeah, we call that stepping into roles. Yeah, that's basically what they're doing. And what kind of a test should be used? Basically, like a basic test.
What would be a way to discern that, I was going to comment that I remember having an astral experience when I was in middle school, and there being a red light in the hallway, and it wasn't there,
Yeah.
and that's all it appeared as, is this red light. But it scared the shit out of me, because I just knew on some level that this was a completely nefarious being, or at least it felt that way at the time. And scared me so bad I woke up. I came out of it, snapped out of it. What would you recommend? How do you discern what's good and evil in these states?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the classic example, and so I'll go back to the biblical model. And in the book of First John, John says that, test every spirit to see whether it's of God. That's his, blanket statement. And in the book of Galatians, Paul says, if anyone comes to you speaking anything other than what we've spoken to you, even if it's an angel from heaven, and so the biblical litmus test is, if they start going against the counsel that came down from the Holy Spirit and behind the book, that. So for Christians, it's kind of easy, but it really isn't, because here's the rub with a lot of Christians. They don't know the word. So if the litmus test is compare what you're being taught by these beings with what was being taught in Scripture, the average Christian, they don't read the word. They don't know it. If you gave them a very standard theology quiz, or a Bible 101 Sunday school test, most professing believers would fail those tests. They don't know anything other than John 3:16. And so even to just say test the spirits against the Scriptures is it's very difficult, because you have to be familiar with them, and a lot of Christians are not. But I just think it is tough. I do read a lot of things online where, push through the fear. And, I do think that a lot of those things that are built into our physiology, when everything in our body is telling us this is a dangerous situation, pushing through that or ignoring that is probably not a good idea. If a fire alarm's going off and you smell smoke, you don't go, I'm going to push through the fear, so
Yeah.
Don't fear the fire.
yeah. So there's a point where if you, like I said, emotions isn't the only litmus test, but a lot of people who practice this stuff, they'll say, this is terrifying, and I hate that sleep paralysis part that I have to go through to get up there. And, so I think common sense is going to take us a long, long way in this, but we do need more discernment than just that, because a lot of these things, they are smarter than us. They've been around a lot longer than us. And it's kind of like taking candy from a baby to fool a human being, because we're in awe of these things. Even the ones that are evil, we're in awe of them, because it's unfamiliar to us, and they're powerful. And, so there's no real easy answer to that question, but I do think a lot of people have discernment and they ignore it. And so my number one piece of advice would be, quit ignoring your own physiological fire alarms.
Very good. A couple of comments out here related. Beth Allen, how you doing, Beth?
Hi, Beth.
Says people don't understand that the astral can be dangerous. It's all fun and games till someone gets hurt. You have to know what you're getting into. And that's exactly it. Like, kind of, how do you draw those discernments? Laurie Ann Sweet says, how you doing tonight, Laurie? So start sending it love and joy, and if it's a demon, it'll run like there's a stench in the room. And that's a good thought.
Yeah.
I like that. Kill it with kindness.
Exactly. And
always listen to your gut.
Yes.
And yes, what would you say to a non-Christian if you're not of that faith, but have these sort of experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy. And I think, one of the difficulties in my approach to this is, even though I was raised in the church, I personally, on my journey, have found that so much doctrine has crept into the traditions of the church, and even like the holidays that are celebrated, and a lot of the theology, a lot of it being what's taught in seminary. If you really bring it back to the root of where a lot of that tradition comes from, it's really not in Scripture, a lot of that stuff. And when you trace it back, it comes from Mithraism, and it comes from a lot of post-Constantine edicts and political movements, and it comes from Catholicism, it comes from sun-worshiping cults, it comes from Egypt, it comes from Babylon. So much of modern Christianity, it goes back to the Judaism, it goes back to Babylon, it goes to that diaspora period where they were in Babylon and things turned very Kabbalistic and things like that. And a lot of that has come into Christianity, and a lot of Christians, they just believe all this stuff, and they have no idea that none of it is in Scripture. And so what I would tell someone who's not a Christian is I'd say that is perfectly okay, because there's actually a movement going on behind the scenes now in Christianity, where a lot of Christians are, the phrase that they're using is we're unlearning the lies, because they're going and they're now questioning everything. And when they hear something, they're like, I'm going to find where it says that in the Bible, and they're not finding it. And you'd be shocked over the things that they are not finding in Scripture, stuff that has been tried and true for centuries. And so I would say, hey, you don't have to be a Christian. But what I would encourage people to do is, I like the route that Elia Marzulli takes. We are in a cosmic war, and we might not know who all the players are and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And, there's a lot of deception there, but we have to understand that behind the scenes, and people who are in the New Age and the occult, I find that people that are in the New Age and the occult, they know far more about the reality of this cosmic war than Christians do, even though it's all over the Scriptures, which is really interesting to me. But this cosmic war in Ephesians 6:12, it talks about the high places. In some translations, it's called the heavenly places. And that's not talking about heaven. It's talking about this dimensional realm. And there's a whole bunch of different names for it. It could be a little lower astral. It could be the astral plane. It could be the second heaven. I find that a lot of these phrases, though, are very polarizing. They're very triggering. And so when you try to find one phrase to make everyone happy, you make half the people, unhappy. So regardless of what you want to call that dimensional space, and so I'll just call it the high places, because that's what it is in the Greek. In the high places, we're told who lives in the high places. We're told that there's rulers and authorities and principalities of darkness and of evil. And if you actually study the Greek in that passage, there's all sorts of information as to who those archons are, these fallen angels. I think it's interesting that verse does not say that demons live in that realm. And I think that's another area where Christians have not been well taught. A demon is a very specific being. You can't just call every evil thing you see in your bedroom a demon.
That's right. The dreaded word is what we call it.
Yes. And I love that. And what's dangerous about it, and this is why so many Christians get into trouble, they read a couple books on spiritual warfare, and they think that, oh, I've got this sword. I've got this, the name of Jesus is like this crucifix to a vampire, and they run around messing with stuff. And yes, we were given power and authority over the demons. That's the good news, right? But we were not given power and authority over these rulers and these archons and these spiritual forces of wickedness in the high places. We were not given authority over those. And so when you start trying to cast those things out, you are now thwarting the cosmic war effort of these things, right? And so I think this is where a lot of Christians get into trouble. They just think anything evil, they can just pray some prayers that they found on the internet, and that these things are going to go fleeing into the darkness because, you said Jesus, and that wasn't even his name. And so, and I'm not saying that there's not power in that name, and a lot of people.
I agree.
We agree
with you on
most
that.
definitely.
Absolutely. Pretty much non-Christian ourselves, but when you look at the spiritual warfare, who are the villains? Who are the heroes? And
right.
Is it? I mean, evil, good and bad, is such a subjective thing, right? It can be good for somebody, it can be negative for somebody else. What is your impression of that? And who are the players?
So kind of going back to the demon thing, and I want to explain this more, just even for any Christians who might be listening. A lot of people think that the demons are the fallen angels, and it's not quite the case. So we've got a whole bunch of classes of various spiritual beings, and so we had the Watchers, and the Watchers were a really unique class of angels, and the Watchers are even mentioned in Gnostic literature. And if anyone ever saw the movie many years ago, that the Hollywood's rendition of Noah, they had the Watchers in there. They were big, like rock people, which I thought was an interesting take on it. But
very interesting. I like that movie.
Yeah, I did too. And so the Watchers, these were an intermediary creature or being that were meant to help us out. They were a kind of our connection that, Adam and Eve lost that connection, that direct connection to heaven. And yet they weren't just thrown out of the garden like, screw you. They actually had this whole class of beings, these Watchers, that were like the mediators and that would help them and would instruct them and teach them about, how to plant and garden and things like that. Well, 200 of these guys went rogue, and they decided, hey, we kind of like this gig that man has down here. That they've got families, and they've got this sex thing that looks pretty good, and they're having boys, and they're naming cities after their progeny, and they're ruling the earth. And they became covetous of that. They thought it was a better deal than being little messenger boys. And so 200 of these guys got together and came down and mated with the women, and they had the infamous Nephilim, right? The giants. It's mentioned in Genesis 6. It's in the book of Enoch 1 is all about what happened there when they came down off Mount Hermon. And so I think what a lot of Christians don't understand is when the flood came and destroyed everyone, these Nephilim giants were half angel. They were demigods. They weren't fully human. So while their flesh was mortal, their flesh perished. Now you have a bunch of disembodied spirits that were progeny of these Watchers, this higher than an angel. The Watchers were higher than angels. They were more powerful. And I think another thing too is not every single Watcher fell. We know of 200 of them that defected. And I think that's why, in this trying to determine who's our friend and who's our foe, we get confused because, again, this isn't my wheelhouse, but if you read up on people that study Bigfoot, who study the Sasquatches, you've got a bunch of stories where, they're evil and scary, but then you've got all these stories too, where the Sasquatch saved the little boy and fed him while he was lost in the woods. And then you have other people telling incredible stories about how we've talked to them and they help us, and so that can be easily determined that, we put everything into these black and white categories. This is good, this is bad, good, evil. And then everybody gets put into those categories. But for situations like the Watchers, 200 of them went rogue. But what happened to the other 200, 2 million? I mean, I don't know how many there were, right? And so, and so then does that mean then that there are still good Watchers out there who maybe aren't interacting with us face to face like they did back in the antediluvian times, but are they still there? And are we running into these people? And so it's a hard question to determine who's friend and who's foe. But the demons are these disembodied Nephilim, and the reason why we have power over them and we can easily cast them out. And you can say in the name of Jesus, get out, and they'll flee. But I've heard just as many people in a sleep paralysis experience say, get out, you have no authority here. And with no mention of Jesus, they're gone, because they know they're extremely legalistic. They know they don't have that authority. And when you call them out on it, they will leave. And the reason we have authority over the demons is because they're half human, they're half flesh. They're cousins, so to speak, right? Whereas these rulers and these archons and these spiritual forces of wickedness and all these things that live in the high places, there's no human DNA in those things, and we do not have authority over them. And I don't think those guys necessarily bug the people like you and me. They've got better things to do. They're not necessarily showing up in your bedroom at night saying boo,
Right.
But I know Christians who get way too deep into spiritual warfare and think they've got way more authority than they do, and they open up these doors and these things come after them and they get eaten alive because they do not have authority over them.
Oh, I would agree. And there's a lot of comments out here. I'm going to try to catch up with a few. Beth Allen had mentioned the Bible has been translated more times than people realize. Even if you know the Bible backwards and forwards, you don't know it all. And then the way the word has been changed to control others and agendas. Absolutely, Beth,
Mhm.
would agree. And we have a user out there, a person on Twitch. We were just talking about Twitch before the show. Who also had a sleep paralysis experience, and
Last
feel
night.
free to chat with him.
Sure.
Mentions demons and whatnot. I don't get to here. Sorry, Andy says my next book explored the origins of evil in early Judaism, which has been all but forgotten by modern Judaism and Christianity. Well, that'll be very interesting.
That'll be great if they don't
Yeah.
ban it, Andy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not 100% sure who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. I mean, all we really have is like what our impression is, and it does seem to be like a psychic impression, right? When you're in those states, in between sleep and wakefulness, you can kind of gauge things. You see things differently. The idea of time, I think you might agree, it just seems to vanish, right? There seems to be no time on the other side, which is an interesting concept, in and of itself. Right there. Laura Ann commented that archons, I've seen archon attachments to the people. They look like crab spiders and lizard-like reptilians. They ride like backpacks.
Yes, that was one of
Mhm.
Lorian was a guest on our show, and that was one of the things I remember most, like definitely sticks in my head was the archons and creepy little suckers.
Absolutely. And do you think they take those forms, Vicki, to frighten or intimidate us? Or is that what they naturally look like?
Yeah, that's a good question because we know that these things have the ability to morph. And I mean, even in the biblical model where the angels come, they're described as guys in bright white linen and they were shiny and blonde hair and but they looked human, but like they might have been a little bit taller or brighter or whatnot, but they took on a somewhat human form. And yet when we go into the scriptures where angels that are in the throne room, and I realize there's different types of angels, but when they start describing in detail the cherubim and the seraphim, where they've got eyes all over and multiple sets of wings and 4 different faces and things like that. And so obviously these things, when they come down to talk to human beings, are kind of coming in a more user-friendly package. And even in their user-friendly package, they're like, don't be afraid. So
Right.
so I do think that, we also too, like with the succubus we've talked about before, she's been seen as a beautiful woman. She's been seen as an ugly woman. She's been seen as like a bat-like creature. A lot of people describe the succubus as having black wings. So I do think that these things can appear in different forms. A lot of people think that the shadow man is the shadow of the hat man. So it's actually the same guy. It just depends on if you're seeing him coming or going, things like that. And so, we're all sort of just kind of throwing darts at the wall here, trying to kind of to figure it out. But it would appear to me that many of these things do have the ability to shapeshift. And even just looking in our literature and in our fiction, so many of these creatures have the ability to shapeshift. We've got the werewolf who can be a man. We've got the vampire who can be a bat. And so that stuff never just comes from nowhere. I mean, that's coming from something factual.
Sure. It's all our folklore. There's always some element of truth in there, right? Even if the whole story isn't, accurate or historically accurate.
Right.
I think it's fascinating that you see a lot of the same types of entities there, right? So you mentioned a shadow person or the hat man. Kristen had a lot of shadow being terrorizing.
It was awful
as a child
when I was little. It was terrible,
and people see them. That's pretty common to see the shadow. Before the show I mentioned old hag, right? So the old hag is the crone, had that experience, and there was a typical crone. They're not aware of old hag syndrome at the time. And then when you look into it, there's all these documented cases going back hundreds of years of people seeing a crone. So, my question, I guess, is she real? Is there really a crone? Is there really a particular hat man, if you will? What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, For as boring as the church has made the Bible, and believe me, I feel like they've gone out of their way to like make this supernatural guidebook as absolutely boring and dull as they possibly could. Like, I mean, you have to go out of your way to make this thing boring, and they've done a great job. But if you actually really study the context, the culture, the language, the history, the geography, and you get really into the like in the New Testament, if you get into the first century Semitic mind, we get out of our American mindsets. And especially as you go back, and a lot of the extra biblical books, which again, the church has done a great job of making us terrified of picking those books up because, they're all Gnostic and they're all evil. But I mean, if you, oh my goodness, if like you read the book of Jubilees, the book of Jubilees is Genesis and part of Exodus, but they've filled in all the gaps that have been taken out. And, like, I'll just give you one of many, many examples, but like there in Genesis, it talks about Joseph putting his cup in Benjamin's sack to come back and say, you stole my cup. Right. In Jubilees, it's you stole my divination cup. Ooh. Okay. Now we're triggered because Joseph was a born again Christian Baptist and he wouldn't have a divination cup, right? And so it's all this stuff that's very triggering to the programming of Christianity. And so you have to realize Moses, Daniel, and Joseph all were educated and raised in the courts of pharaohs and of Babylonian kings. Daniel was there with Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. And Moses was raised as the Pharaoh's son, as a grandson, rather. And if you think as a Christian that Moses was not familiar with the emerald, tablets of Thoth and the Book of the Dead, like if you think he did not have the information. I didn't say he practiced it. I don't know. But what I'm telling you is if you were educated way back then in Egypt or in Babylon, in the courts, under the kings, in the royal palace, you knew and understood divination. And there's all these triggering words. Christians don't want to hear divination. They don't want to hear witchcraft. They don't want to hear magic. They don't want to, hear these different words. And we did have different words from, and this is where Andy's book might get really interesting. Even the Zodiac, that originated with the people of God, that originated with the Hebrew people. It was called the Mazzaroth back then. And some of the constellations were different, but the 12 constellations mirrored the 12 tribes. The signs of the 12 tribes matched the constellations. Judah was the lion of the tribe of Judah. And so now you've got the lion, and, Reuben was the man, the firstborn. He was the Aquarius. And so it's all biblical, but Christians are scared to death of it, but so I'm probably losing sight of my question, you guys, and I'm sorry if I'm babbling, but
it's great.
I know I didn't write the book on it. The book is on sleep paralysis, but I'm very fascinated with the whole topic of Christian mysticism. And, what's funny to me is, meaning ironic to me, is a lot of Christians now who have been taught to be terrified of things because they're New Age, but before they were New Age, they belong to God. And so, just like one of the comments earlier, the Bible has been twisted and it's been used by power brokers to, have us live in fear and things. And I do think that the Bible has been used in that way. And I think seminaries are very off track now. But the actual information, the actual knowledge is still there to be found. The truth is still out there, not to be cliche, but it takes it's not like raking leaves, like where you sit out on a sunny day and rake leaves. That's not how you find truth. That's not how you find knowledge. Knowledge is the deep dive for the sunken treasure chest. So you got to buy thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and you've got to take the diver down training, and you've got to go into dark, cold, dangerous places where if your oxygen tank busts, you have to risk your life for those kinds of treasures. And so I think that the truth is there. But I think that we have a lot of interference. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There are a lot of liars out there, and a lot of liars posing as people who love us and care about us, and inside and outside the church, believe me. So much discernment is needed to test these spirits.
Yeah, I agree. And I think mentioning the constellations there and the Zodiac, I think it's fascinating that different cultures would come up with a lot of the same zodiac symbols, if you will, or
Yes.
constellations, similar, having a scorpion. Because I mean, really, when you look at a
Well,
constellation, it's just a few dots right in the sky.
right.
And how did these different cultures that didn't know each other, say, oh yeah, there's Scorpio.
Well, you got to look at Göbekli Tepe. That's almost 12,000 years old. They have the Scorpio, which is constellation back then. So it's gone. Lord only knows how many civilizations.
Iterations.
Yeah, there was way before us. So it may have came down from those civilizations to them, so everything's being copied, but in their own way.
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
they were taught by some kind of entity, and
They could have been
a non-human entity, or there was a lot of belief, certainly in all our cultures, just going back 100 years or 200 years. Idea of magic, the idea of that, and using sorcery was common. It was just an accepted thing. It seems like it's been pushed away by church and other organizations to kind of like erase these things. So maybe perhaps the reason being they don't want us to get good at them, or to have acquired that knowledge that maybe wasn't in whatever religious text you want to look at.
Lori Ann had said that a little while ago too. She said, "Preach it, Sister Vicki."
Yeah.
One of the passages in scripture that I like to use to challenge Christians with is, let's take that curious story where Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh, and they wanted permission to leave and go and celebrate their feast. And so Moses is standing before Pharaoh, and he in essence is doing magic tricks, right? He is turning his staff into a serpent, and his hand is leprous, and then he's putting it back in the sleeve, and then it's not leprous anymore. And what's interesting to me is that Pharaoh goes and he gets his magicians who do the exact same things. And so what I'm challenging any Christians who are listening out there, because this is a tradition I was raised into, but these are the things that they never explain, and that is, how come the magicians were practicing sorcery and Moses was doing the exact same thing and he was not? These are the kind of questions we need to ask who were raised in the church. And so what it gets down to is this question we're talking about now. Who are the good guys, who are the bad guys? The fact of the matter is both of them were borrowing power from another cosmic dimension in order for these tricks to be done through them. The only difference between what Moses was doing and what the magicians were doing is they were borrowing the power from different sources. Okay. And so in the end, Moses won that little showdown because why? When all of them threw down their staves and they turned into snakes, his staff ate the other ones up, right? So he won. And for those of us, we won't go off on a tangent, but these staffs weren't just walking sticks. Like back then, if you had a staff, this was a position of authority. You had power. You had a link to the other world. And so if your staff got eaten up and you didn't have that staff anymore, it's not just like, well, I'm going to go and buy a new walking stick, right? So there was a message being sent there over the authority of Moses's power source, over the authority of the power source that they were seeking. And so, but this is where I'm saying, Christians, you need to be intellectually honest and you have to ask hard questions. Don't be afraid of the hard questions, because every time we hit those biblical brick walls, we just go like, okay, well, the Bible's wrong. Or we're like, oh, okay, well, my pastor's wrong. I tell you that where the Bible gets very exciting is when you push through those questions and you go back into ancient texts, and if you're not afraid of the questions, the stuff that's available to us knowledge-wise will blow your mind. So I just encourage people, when you hit those brick walls, just keep pushing through, because what's beyond those brick walls is amazing.
I mean, turning water into wine, it's pure sorcery right there.
That's right.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. This is an interesting comment from Andy. He said in his experience, they take on a form that fits the mindset of the viewer.
Yes.
And I like that.
Yeah.
There's got probably some truth to that. We were talking about, whether this crab-like figure is really crab-like. Well, but it's something that you can understand or wrap your head around. They might be just so outside of our scope of knowledge that we wouldn't understand what we were looking at. Do you think that plays a role?
Absolutely. That's such a great point, Andy. And I think this is why so many Christians, every single time they see something weird, it's a demon. And again, I do think that there's stuff in between demons and the archons and the high places, right? And I think that there's all sorts of things, and not even necessarily created beings, because I mean, we know the Nephilim, they weren't created by God. They were a genetic experiment between watchers mating with humans. And so I think, even when you kind of get into more of like the UFO research, there are people out there that believe that the grays aren't some sort of product of conception at all, or product of creation, but rather that this sort of genetic experiment that kind of made this race. And so another thing that we have to just bear in mind as we talk about the spirit realm is not everything's an angel or an archon or a demon. There might even, man has been involved for thousands of years now, and genetic experiments, they're not something that's just new. Even if you go back into the original language of Genesis, there's a verse that talks about Noah was perfect in his generations. And so a lot of people said, well, he was he must have been a really righteous man. It's like, it has nothing to do with how good or bad he was, or how righteous he was, or if he kept the law. Perfect in his generations meant he and his family were the only people left alive that hadn't been genetically diluted with demigod or Nephilim or Watcher blood. And that's a whole nother book. And I don't know, Andy, maybe you can help me write that book. If you go all the way back, all the way to the Garden of Eden, everything from Genesis 1 all the way to Revelation 22 or whatever it is, it's all about bloodlines and genetics. The Bible is, if you want to know about creepy, weird, cosmic war against bloodlines, it's a great book if you look at it through different eyes. If you look at it through like the lenses that we're talking about now, this is a seed war. Who is going to run the kingdom of earth? That is what the whole point of the scripture is. It was the whole message that Jesus taught when he came to earth. A lot of people think that when he was on earth, he just taught love each other or pray a prayer or go to church. What he was preaching is there's a coming kingdom, that there's two kingdoms at war. In fact, that's the way the scripture says it. It doesn't say he preaches the gospel. It said he preached the gospel of the kingdom. He was talking about a cosmic war that was going to come upon the earth, and the winner would take the scepter and rule the earth. That's what he was talking about.
Wow.
He wasn't talking about Sunday school.
What do you think the value is to these entities, these non-human entities? What is it that we have here, besides the human experience, that they would want? Like, what is it about the earth that makes it so special, and why are they even interested?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question. There are numerous concepts in both scripture as well as in the book of Enoch and other places that it's interesting. When you look at Lucifer falling from heaven, when you look at the Watchers coming down and mating with the earth women, when you look at Adam and Eve and why they ate the fruit, there's something all three of these stories have in common. They weren't satisfied with their first estate. Okay, Lucifer was number 2 in command, and he wasn't satisfied. There was one more rung up that he wanted to achieve. He was not content with the estate that he had. The Watchers, they were not content with their estate. We like what men get to do. Look at, they're building kingdoms. They're naming cities after themselves. They're ruling. We want to do that. And so their discontentment with the class that they'd been assigned. And it's the same thing with Adam and Eve. Hey, he's withholding something from you. There's better out there. Hey, you're right. Let's switch up here. And so I think that there is, we see it even just on a human level. We have this propensity as human beings to always think that someone else has the better deal. Someone else has got the better body. They got the better house. They got the better spouse. They got the better job. They got the better income. And that is like just built into our DNA to always think that someone has got something better than us. And it's interesting to me that even before all of man, even before Adam and Eve sinned, even before these Watchers or Lucifer were bad or did anything wrong. There was a seed that existed in their perfect physiology that was this kink in the armor. They had the capacity to look around them and say, that looks better. And that's fascinating to me that existed before anybody did anything wrong, right? And this is just another area where Christianity has a really hard uphill climb, because I find a lot of Christians, even more than wanting to preach the gospel, what they want to do is they want to rescue God from his reputation, because the Bible says he's good and that he's loving and that it's not his will that anyone would perish. But then we read about all this stuff that he's doing. And I'm just telling you, Christians, if your goal is to try to save God from his reputation and try to prove in human terms that goodness and love that he claims to have is the goodness and love according to our earthly definitions, it's a losing battle. You're not going to do it. So what's interesting, and where God doesn't get off the hook, this is where you've got to hit that brick wall and go further. There was a glitch. There was a potential glitch. I always call it, it's that like that in Star Wars, it's that one place in the Death Star. It's like, why'd they put that there? Why would you build this space station? And they're like, but if you shoot this, it'll blow up. Like, why would you do that?
Just about with a cat.
That's right. So we all have that. We all have that in our hearts. Even before we had done anything that would have been construed wrong or bad or sinful or evil, there was that little switch that had the capacity to say, I am not content with all I have and what I've been given and who I am. And so anyway, these are just some of those things that if you remember anything that I say today, we all hit the brick walls, whether you're a Christian, you're an atheist, you're an occultist, we all hit these brick walls. And I'm just telling you that instead of being, I compare this to like, when you're a kid and you're in the sandbox and the other kid won't share his toys, and you're like, nah, nah, and then you pick up your ball and you go home. That's what we do when we hit these brick walls, when we pick up our ball and we go home. And it's so easy to just say like, well, okay, my pastor's crazy, or he's a hypocrite, or this Bible's a bunch of garbage, and move on. But I'm telling you, if you've got the chutzpah to stay in that sandbox with the person you're arguing with and work through it and kick through that brick wall, there absolutely is mind-blowingly supernatural, sensical answers to these questions.
Yeah, and phenomena that surrounds it as well. And I don't think it's relegated to Christians. I wanted to say it can be anything, like you mentioned, an atheist. It's just, expanding your own boundaries, being open to new ideas. The only way we'll ever learn anything. And it sounds like, a couple of those things you mentioned, really, when we said what's of value, is really like the emotional connection, sex. Dr. Michael Lynch, he says, multiply and prosper here. And that, maybe, do you think they don't have that kind of experience? I don't know. Are they non-gender, do you think, when we talk about something like, a non-human entity, something like an alien, or perhaps a god, lesser god or a demon? Do you think they're kind of non-gender, and that they'd want to have that experience where our race is, to survive, we have to multiply and that sort of thing? The idea of sex is human, and our world is built around it, right? Or it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a great question, and it's one where the church has answers, but they're not very satisfying. And I think this whole idea that angels are sort of like Ken dolls, you whip the pants off and there's nothing down there. I think that comes from, I'm guessing that comes from some Pharisees were trying to, back Jesus into a corner once, and they're like, well, what if I die? And then my wife marries my brother, and then he marries brother, and whose husband, whose wife will she be in heaven if she married all 7 of the brothers? And Jesus says, you don't know the scriptures. When man dies, he will be like the angels and not be given in marriage. And so a lot of people then take that and run with it and say, well, we're going to be like the angels. So that means that the angels, can't procreate, and they don't get married, and they don't. And then, but then it turns in, then they don't have sex, and they don't have organs, and then they don't have a gender, and it turns into all this. But all he meant was angels don't get married, and it's not going to be the same way. And so I think people have like taken it that far. But going back to kind of the whole idea of, do they have the ability to shapeshift? And this also goes all the way back into our fiction and into our lore. If you go back, like I'm talking way back, like before Bram Stoker days, if you go back before Bram and you study like original vampires, or back before vampire wasn't even spelled that way, they weren't even called that way, and the Dompiers and all this stuff. In original vampire lore, these things were the whole mythology there, it's the same thing. What a vampire used to do in way back in the days, it was a human being who would die, and he died without progeny, and so he would come back to life in demonic form, right? In a zombie-like form, and he would impregnate his living wife so that she could have a child, so that his progeny wouldn't die off. This is kind of where this was like the seed of where it started, but it started all the way back before then. I mean, because the Watchers were doing this. And so I find it a little frustrating when Christians throw out vast portions of the scripture that then make the rest of the scriptures impossible to understand, because you've pulled a piece out that you aren't
Like
comfortable with.
And yes.
Yeah. Or Genesis 6. In seminaries, Genesis 6 is taught that the daughters of men and the sons of God and the daughters of men were that the bloodlines were mixing. Canaanites were marrying Sethites. And it's like, that's great. Then you move all the creepy stuff from scripture, and we can pretend that nothing supernatural ever happened back then. But now you have a problem. If you married, if a Sethite married a Canaanite, why are they giving birth to giants? I mean, why are they? So it just doesn't make sense. And so what happens is you pull these things out, and now the rest of scripture no longer makes sense because that supernatural piece has been pulled out. And where a lot of Christians get hung up is, well, if a Watcher was an angel, he wouldn't have a penis. He couldn't have sex. And then the whole thing gets thrown out because you as a human being can't fathom that this angel figured out a way to shapeshift into a man. And I don't think that's a huge stretch. But
like a 10-foot penis, right? I mean, these giants and Nephilim, according to the Bible and things, they were really big. Of course, the anatomy doesn't work out. They kill people if they maintain that physical form, right? And
I agree with you.
Lorianne mentioned spectrophilia, which is sex with a ghost, and people talk about this happening, and we talk about incubi, succubi phenomena. Is that a driving force, the sexual experience to these non-human entities, do you think?
It is a driving force, and I think this is one of the areas, though, where we do have to be very discerning, because just like it is for us in the natural and in the physical realm, when you have sex with someone, whether you like it or not, your physiology changes. There's connections there. There's a sharing of DNA in some cases, between the mitochondria, and there is a soul bond that occurs, physiologically and cerebrally in the brain of a woman, and there's attachments there. And so we carry those same spiritual and physiological changes regardless of what we're having sex with. So now when you're copulating with an entity or a spirit being or a demon, even if it feels great, and even if both people are consenting, and even if there's no pregnancy or weird, V is for visitor reptile babies out of the deal, right? The fact of the matter is there is a covenant being made, because, even in our marriage contracts, you can nullify a marriage if it hasn't been consummated, because the consummation is what seals that marriage contract. And so I write my chapter 4 in the book. The whole chapter is about threshold covenants and astral vampires. And threshold covenants, especially I'd love to hear Andy's take on this too. In Semitic cultures, if you go all the way back into Semitic cultures, there was a massive tie between threshold covenants and betrothal covenants, and where you would have nowadays in a Jewish wedding, the chuppah is just kind of like an archway that's on the wedding platform. But in the old days, the chuppah was the actual tent. It was the honeymoon tent, and you would go into the inner chamber where it was consummated. And so there's a lot of talk in the Bible about doorways, gateways, thresholds, and this is one of those brick walls that where the Bible isn't as boring as you think it is. If you read a lot of those verses in scripture that talk about doors, thresholds, and you take out the word door and you put in the word portal, or like you're thinking in terms of like a spiritual portal, there's maybe some other things going on in those scriptures more than what we think. And so the thing with these contracts, these covenants, is we see this in vampire lore. A vampire cannot come into our room unless we've given it an invitation.
Right.
And this is not the law of the vampire. This is the law of the spiritual realm, period. We even see this being observed by Jesus himself. In Revelation 3:20, he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and answers the door and lets me in, I will come in." So even he's saying, I'm going to knock, but if I don't get invited in, I won't come in. I don't barge in. I'm not a thief. Thieves and robbers barge into homes. And so if you don't invite me over the threshold, I won't come in and eat with you. And even that terminology, where Jesus says once he crosses that threshold, he's going to dine with us or sup with us, that enacts a second covenant, which is the salt covenant, the bread and salt covenant. When you break bread together, that's another ancient covenant. Henry Clay Trumbull wrote at length about these covenants in the 1800s. Very fascinating stuff. So once you have a bread covenant with someone, it's very much like a betrothal covenant. You know, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to protect you. I will never harm you. And there's great stories in antiquity where kings and various rulers and warriors would trick their enemies into eating salt so that they would be safe from being attacked. And we see this in the famous painting of the Last Supper. We see Judas, the guy who's holding the money bag with the 30 pieces of silver. If you look closely on that, there's a jar next to his forearm that's tipped, and there's salt tipped on the table, because Judas broke bread with Jesus. Jesus dipped the bread in the bowl. He shared that morsel with Judas. Judas imbibed in a salt covenant with Jesus, and then he broke that covenant because he went and betrayed him. And when you make a salt covenant with someone, you're saying, I will never betray you. And so Judas was not worth his salt. That's where we get that expression. And so these various thresholds, they tie in very closely to the wedding chuppah, the wedding threshold. When you are invited into that wedding chuppah by your bride, it's for a consummation. You'll notice vampire lore, as well as the incubus and the succubus. A lot of these experiences do have a sexual component to them. It can be all out sex. It can just be some erotic experience. And we see this all over the place. And I believe it is a type of betrothal contract. And so it's not just like, oh, I had astral sex last night and man, it felt so good. You are actually entering into betrothal contracts with these entities. So if you don't really know who that entity is, or if they're a wolf or a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you don't really know what they want or what all is all involved in those betrothal contracts, this is where we have to think beyond the like, oh, that felt good, or that made me feel powerful, or guess what I did last night. You know, we've got to understand that these spirit beings are very legalistic, and it is very easy to dupe a human being into granting invitation, and it is very difficult to get those contracts torn up. So careful out there.
And what do you think the price is for those contracts if you break them?
Well, ultimately, you know, the horror movie answer is like, you sold your soul to the devil at the crossroads, you know, that sort of thing. And the fact of the matter is, as long as you're alive, there's no spiritual covenant or contract that can't be broken. That's my belief. And so I do think that they can be. But what I talk about a lot in the books, I talk about transformation. And I actually quote at the beginning of one of the chapters, Clive Barker, you know, a famous playwright and author, books of Blood, Hellraiser, all that stuff. Sure. And he has a quote, and I love it. He talks about people who have had these paranormal experiences. It's about what you do tomorrow. These people that have had these paranormal experiences and they do nothing with them but go onto a talk show talk about like, ooh, my flesh is horripilating, this campfire story. He's like, if that's all you do with the paranormal experience, he says, you haven't been transformed. And even in our vampire lore, when you're bitten by a vampire, what happens? You're transformed into the likeness of that vampire. You become like that vampire. You are transformed into that image. And this goes all the way back to Genesis 1. It all goes back to Genesis. When according to the creation, narrative, when God breathed into our nostrils, at that point, we bore his image. We were in his image because we have his breath in us. And so I do think what a lot of these nefarious spirit beings who are posing as Jesus Christ in the astral and who are posing as gods and who are telling you can be a god, it's a transformational process, going from image bearers of this God nobody likes to image bearers of ourself, which in many cases are gods that we worship itself. It's a transformation to bear another image other than the one that was created there. And so we even see this in technology. If you've read anything about singularity and transhumanism, it's all about a transformation. It's about becoming something different than the original human being that was just flesh and clay and in the image of this antiquated God that everybody thinks is so boring and dull and mean. And so we've got a better God whose image we are going to bear. And so just like when a woman marries a man, I'm going to take on, the two are going to become one flesh. I'm going to become part of your family. At least in the past, we would take that name, we would take the man's. It is a transforming into the image of the one we are consummating with.
Interesting. Yeah, totally interesting. Lorianne asked in there, what about the ghost who haunts one's home that is not wanted or invited in the door? Now, we haven't invited the vampire over the threshold, but there they are.
Yeah, this is where it gets unfair because a lot of these things know how to trick us into inviting. So it's not just yes, you are more than welcome to come in. Please join me. It's not the way that we invite these spiritual beings it's more through our will. And it's more, and we talked earlier about the loose. We can draw them over the threshold via fear. We can draw them over the threshold via any sort of energy that we're emitting from our body. That if we can't control that, it is a form of an invitation. It's a cheating way. I mean, they're being tricksters, as they're very good at doing. But if we're emitting off basically a homing device that draws them over that threshold, to them it's fair game. Like, hey, you turned on your magnet. It was your fault. So. And that's what's great about all of these covenants. This is the good and the bad about the way the entities in the spiritual realm operate. The good and the bad is that they are extremely legalistic. One side, that's bad because then it's easy to, they know a lot of the rules and we don't know a lot of them. And so it's very easy to trick us into those things. And then we're legally bound into these covenants. Mm-hmm. But it's a double-edged sword because they're so legalistic. When we find the ways to break those contracts, they must go.
They sound like lawyers.
Yeah,
they absolutely.
The lawyers are the devil, after all.
Absolutely,
because of this clause, and on page 335, it states clearly right here. No, that's interesting. I like that. And do you think there are a lot of them? A lot of different ones. So people are maybe mistaking the one, say a one God, when they should really have more of a polytheistic view and be entertained by the idea that there might be multiple gods, like the Greeks and the Egyptians. Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. Okay, Christians, sorry. I'm about to trigger you big time again. I'm so sorry. But there is a verse in Scripture, Psalm 82. And you have to probably read some older translations because, of course, they pull it out of some of the modern ones because people don't like it and it triggers them. But it is talking about this divine council. And this is kind of like the UN of heaven, right? There's like, let's just picture this big boardroom. And at the table is one representative of every created being, right? So we've got, okay, here's a guardian angel, here's a cherub, here's a seraphim. That's where Adam originally sat before he gave up his position and was thrown off the divine council because he sinned. And now Jesus takes that place as the mediator for man. So this is the makeup of a divine council. And Psalm 82 talks about it. And Michael Heiser writes a great book about the whole thing. The whole book is about this. It's called The Unseen Realm, I believe. Any Christian who reads that Unseen Realm and has their eyes opened, you will never read your Bible the same way ever again. You might not even be able to stomach the church you're in ever again. It's a mind-blowing book. But anyway, in this divine council, God is judging the fallen ones, and he's saying, he's calling them gods. And here's where the English really loses. This is one of those Jenga pieces I was talking about, where when we lose touch with the culture and the language of the original meaning, we miss the whole rest of scripture is no longer to make sense. So in Hebrew, the word Elohim, and Elohim is a plural word. There's no way out of it. I am on a Hebrew word. It's like the English S. So Eloha would be like a one God, but Elohim, God, is always referred to as Elohim. And so the way that Christians say this is like, well, yeah, it's God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. He's a Trinity. And well, a rabbi or a Jewish person would laugh you to scorn if that was your explanation. So the fact is that Elohim simply doesn't mean what we think it means. So in the King James Version, when that first got translated, every time it said Elohim, they turned it into God or Lord or, what. And so now whenever we see the word God, we as modern 21st century Christians, we think there's this one monotheistic God who sits on a throne in heaven, who created the world, and he's going to come back and judge everything. And that's the capital G God. But in Hebrew, that's not what Elohim means. Elohim means anything that inhabits the spiritual realm. So in other words, it's sort of the equivalent to we are all earthlings, okay? Everybody who lives on planet Earth is an earthling, or we're all humans. So everybody that inhabits the physical realm are humans, right? So all an Elohim is an inhabitant of the spiritual realms. It can be a dead person in Sheol because they're no longer on the physical plane. It can be an angel. It can be a fallen angel. It can be God. It can be Jesus. It can be the Holy Spirit. It can be these archons in the astral realm. It all Elohim really means is not of earth, not of human DNA, doesn't live in the physical realm. So where this gets very confusing then is a lot of people will quote the Shema passage. The Jewish people say, our God is one, and then it turns into monotheism. And then Christianity is like, there's one God. So all these other things, they're just idols, they're just demons, they're just imposters. No, there are many, 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 many gods, whether you want to say with a lowercase g, but the fact of the matter is linguistically, Elohim is plural. And so what a Jewish person and what a Christian person are really saying, whether they realize it or not, is what they're saying is there's only one God I am going to glorify. That doesn't mean that there's not other ones out there vying for that glory.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, pre-Christian times and other older civilizations, so you could use Native Americans or really anything, they were very much polytheistic, right? They had multiple gods. Shamanism talks about the spirit of the wind, and there's all these, everything kind of has the sort of spiritual aspect attached to it, which I think is probably closer to the truth. It just seems like the more modern times have tried to lump everything as well. That's just God.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is where I like to kind of strip away and really differentiate between Christianity per se And why I like the terminology of, like, let's say this is a cosmic war and all of these gods are at war with one another, and we're kind of the cannon fodder and like tug of war in between these things, right? So in terms of a cosmic war, the most important question isn't, is there more than one God? The more important question is it important that I pick a side? Is there a losing side in this? And if there is a losing side, what is going to be lost? So I think that we just have to ask deeper questions. We're still stuck on, is there more than one God? We're still fighting about that, and what I would suggest, if there's a war going on and there's two opposing sides, we know there's two kingdoms. The Bible says that the kingdom of earth right now is in the hands of the evil one, that Satan is ruling and reigning planet earth right now. God isn't. He's acquiesced that. That's why his kingdom is going to come. When his kingdom comes, then it's his turn. That's the whole gospel. So the question is there a cosmic war between two gods? Is it important that I pick a side? If one side ends up losing, what does that mean to me? What am I going to lose? Those are the questions. Those are the brick walls that we run into, and people are going to have different answers.
Absolutely.
The way, and so this is where we need discernment, because I do think that there's, like in any war, there is a lot at stake and there are casualties, and so we have to ask the question. What do I do to avoid being a casualty when this cosmic war hits the fan?
Right. And the veils are down and you see what's really going on. It reminds me of the Galactic Federation of Light, which is something we've had some guests talk about.
Yes.
Gets talked about more and more. It's kind of more of a more recent thing where you've got these different species of aliens, I suppose, sitting on the councils, Pleiadians and different things. Right. A lot of it speaks to ufology. And when you talk about sleep paralysis, this is where a lot of people have those experiences, right? And kind of in those hypnagogic and hypnopompic states. You had a lot of surgeries as a child and kind of were exposed to some of this via anesthesia. Of course, other cultures do use things like ayahuasca or, peyote or whatever it is.
Mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You connect with God or gods. How can we better do this? I guess how can we better communicate? And about sleep paralysis, where did that come from with you as far as writing this book? I don't want to lose track of your book, and I definitely want people to have a sense of what you're writing about, because I know we're going in a lot of different directions, and that's our fault. Sorry, because we're like a haunted bag of squirrels.
That's me.
My pet name for
haunted bag of squirrels.
Kristen.
My own little cryptid in myself.
Different directions a lot of times. But yeah, let's circle back to the book and ufology and how that plays a role. These demons, these incubi, and sleep paralysis.
Yeah, I definitely want to bring the UFO stuff into it. So just going back to why I chose to write on this subject, I wanted to be a writer since I was 10 years old. I was always just writing poetry, and I was encouraged in that area, and my mom was a writer. And so I've always wanted to write. Never really thought about writing on this topic, because growing up, wasn't something I talked about, because I tried to tell a friend of mine when I was 15. It was the first time I actually told someone like what was going on. She was very empathetic and she believed me and she was respectful and it was great. But she went home and she came back to school on Monday and had talked to her devoutly Catholic mother, who had diagnosed that I must be demon possessed and I need to be hauled in before a priest and be exorcised of demons. And I was like, I didn't do it. I was like, no way. But anyway, that showed me at 15, you're not going to tell people about this. This is, hush, hush. But it was somewhere in my early 30s, I accidentally stumbled upon the phrase sleep paralysis for the very first time. I had never heard it before. And when I heard someone describing to a T these experiences I've been having my whole life, I never realized that this is something that anyone other than me had ever experienced, because, up to that point, the internet was fairly new, at the whole hive mind, nobody was talking about this stuff, because if
No.
you talked
Yeah.
about it, you're schizophrenic and you got put on psych meds. Like, you didn't talk about it.
Right.
Well, you got locked up. Your family thinks you're nuts and they lock you up.
Right.
Yeah.
Go for the straitjacket fitting.
Right.
So I was like, no, I'm not going to talk about this. So when I found out that thousands of other people were experiencing this, and they were being harassed and they were being tormented and they were becoming insomniacs, and like, to this day, I'm a night owl. Like, if I have to go to bed before 3, that was one of my things. Like, you can't outsmart these things. Anytime you think you're going to like trick them, they're like, oh, you think you're clever. And so I had this thing like, well, 3 a.m. is the witching hour. So if I go to bed after 3, it won't happen anymore. And they're like, yeah, right. So but it developed that habit through my lifetime. And so I'm always like, I stay up way too late, and I'm not scared to go to bed anymore, but it's just your body just gets used to what you've done your whole life. And so when I found out that other people were being tormented by this, it started out with this really altruistic, like, I'm going to help them. And I've had this for so many years, so I know and I grabbed my laptop, and before my fingers even hit the keys, I hit one of those brick walls like we've been talking about. And I thought, wait a minute, this has happened to me my whole life, but I don't know what these things are. I don't know why they're after me. I don't know what their goal is. I didn't know. And I couldn't even start writing the book. It took me months, and I spent months in prayer, in fasting, journaling, talking to other people, praying with people, because my goal was to not regurgitate. That was the thought that came through my mind. You're not going to write one word in this book until you can write something that hasn't been written before, because all the garbage on the internet, where it's just narcolepsy and you ate spaghetti before you went to bed, and all this silly stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, I want to say something new, but I want to say something true too. And if I can't say something that progresses the conversation forward, if all I'm doing is writing a little 5th grade research paper where I go to the encyclopedia and I rewrite it my own words, so it's not plagiarism, then it's of no value to anyone. And so that's what brought me to the place where I wanted to write the book, because once I started investigating it for myself, answering the questions for myself, they became so intriguing to me that I thought, surely other people are going to find this information helpful. And so, do write it through biblical lenses. I try not to do that in an offensive way. I'm not promoting Christianity. I'm not saying people need to join a church and bring a hot dish on Wednesday nights, but I'm bringing in the biblical sources. I'm bringing in a lot of extra biblical sources, anti-biblical sources. There's a lot in here about the New Age and the occult. I talk a lot about H.P. Lovecraft and Robert Monroe. I bring in philosophy. I bring in physiological stuff. So I'm trying to kind of gather everybody around the table. And I kind of use this analogy where science and the church have kind of gone through this bitter divorce, and I want to bring it to this place where like the Reese's peanut butter cup commercials, where they accidentally get the chocolate in each other's peanut butter, and then they discover, like, wow, we should have done this a long time ago, because Christians, science is a cool, wonderful, awesome thing. Science can only benefit your cause. But hey, scientists, you don't have to be afraid of the things you can't see. You don't have to be afraid of the supernatural. Like, just because you can't plot everything in an Excel file or have a math equation to it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like, you guys have to stop being afraid of each other. And Christians and atheists have to stop being afraid of each other, and New Agers and religious people need to, we all have, it's like there's this 1,000-piece puzzle, and all we have to do is put it together and we will figure this out. But everybody's got their one piece, and they're like, I'm not showing you my piece. I don't like your piece. Well, no, and we're all like hoarding our pieces. If we would just show up to the table and put our piece down and collect them together, I think that we could get out of this rut we've been in, where we can't talk truthfully or intellectually or honestly about this topic. It's amazing to me how openly, without any blushing whatsoever, we can talk without any sort of embarrassment about all of these things now that are being revealed in UFOs and multiverses and astral realm and Akashic records, but someone talks about sleep paralysis and everybody craps the bed. I don't understand why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, we agree with you 100% with that, with the everybody needs to come together, and because it's like some of the investigators don't get along with the UFO people and vice versa, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
They're all for the same thing. Let's just do it.
And there's so many parallels, right? So
there are.
You know, when we're talking again about those hypnagogic, hypnopompic states, where I imagine our brain, I'm not sure exactly where they are, but our brain rates are somewhere in a, you know, this deep trance state. And obviously meditation and trance has been promoted from so many different cultures, right? If you get into things like the occult, one of the first things that you'll see is, oh, you need to meditate, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to do this, have control of these states. Hemisync takes you down to the certain brain states, you know, intentionally trying to get you in them. So do you think that it's these brain states themselves that open up as a sort of a portal to, you know, these beings, or, you know, the afterlife in general, even deceased humans, that sort of thing?
Yeah. I definitely think there's something going on cerebrally, and I don't necessarily know that we have the right terms for them yet. Like we know that when we are in alternate states of consciousness, we can traverse the realms. We know that, but I almost wonder sometimes if we don't even have the right terminology down yet. I do think that the pineal gland has a lot to do with this. One of the things that I have discovered in my own experiences, and this is the upshot of having sleep paralysis hundreds and hundreds of times over the course of your life, is if you're an inquiring mind, if you're someone who pays attention to the things that are happening to you, you pay attention to your dreams, you pay attention to spiritual things and self-growth and all that. If you're like me, when these things happen, even though they're scary, you think, okay, what was that? And you start asking questions. And then the next time it happens, even though you're scared and you're trying to get yourself out of it, you're also observing and testing the things the questions that you were asking. And so when a lot of times when I read about sleep paralysis, people say, I'm in my room and I can't move, but my eyes are open. And so it's this idea that you're awake, but you can't move and you're in your bedroom. And I believed that for many years because I read it online. So it had to be true. Right. And so what ended up happening is I started testing some of those things. So I would sleep with a sleep mask on, and I would put like a sleep mask on, and then I would like wrap like my pajama bottoms like tightly around so like no light would get through. Like there's no question in my mind that even if my eyes are open, I would not be able to see. And interestingly, when I had sleep paralysis in that state, I wouldn't see my bedroom. I would see other things. So I thought, okay, so my eyes, they might be open or closed. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is I'm not in my bedroom right now. And another thing that became very clear to me is, if you'll notice, when you're seeing the visualization of your bedroom, or if you're in a hotel room or you're sleeping on the couch, wherever you are, try to find a glitch, because what I have found when I have sleep paralysis is there's always one thing wrong with my room. It's not my headboard. The door is on the wrong wall. The bedspread is not the right one. Or all of a sudden there's like a TV on the wall and I don't have a TV. Things like that.
Yeah, something is
right.
So
why do you think that something is off? Please.
Well, so some of my theories, because this is sort of new for me. So obviously anyone astral projects, you see tons and tons and tons of truth in plain sights in the Matrix movies. Obviously, you see, that every time he's in the Matrix and it's green and everything's green and you've got all that like imagery, and that glitch in the Matrix scene where the cat comes around a second time and they're like, it's a glitch in the Matrix. I was like, oh, when they have to create an infrastructure, and I think a lot of technology, and I'm not a technophobe. I love my phone, and like I'm a technophobe. Like I'm not a technophobe. But when you have to create infrastructure to build a godlike persona. Like if you're not God, but you're presenting yourself as one, you're not omniscient, you're not omnipresent, you're not, you're not all knowing, you're not all powerful, you're not everywhere. If you really break down a lot of the technology that is out there now, it is a recreation of omnipresence. They know where we are at every time with GPS coordinates. They at any time, like God, they can say where you are. They're not omnipresent. They're not everywhere, but they know now how to have eyes everywhere. And then if you look at omnipresent and being all powerful, a lot of these technologies are giving non-gods godlike powers. And so what we have here now is, okay, when I'm in this state, am I in the astral? Am I in my bedroom? Or are they hacking into my brain somehow? Are they hacking into my pineal gland? Are they hacking? And we know that they can do this because it's all declassified now. We know voice to skull. We've heard about all this stuff now. They've militarized it. We know that the technology exists where they can put voices in our head. There is a region in the brain where if you probe it or if something's pushing up against it, you will see shadow people. All of these experiences can now technologically be recreated. And so in one way, this is going to be used to gaslight the authentic. Oh, you didn't have sleep paralysis. You must have something pushing up against your brain if you see shadow people. Like there's going to be medical and scientific explanations for all of it. So the people that are really feeling, like really experiencing this stuff, they can be written off because I know we figured out a way to recreate that. Therefore, that's just a simulation. But it also makes me wonder if maybe we aren't in our bedroom. Maybe we aren't in the astral realm. Maybe it's all a simulation. Maybe it's an overlay, because some of those experiences I had with the sleep mask on, what was fascinating to me, the most fascinating to me about those two experiences was the things that I visualized were not scary. They were not demonic. They weren't spiritual. They were technological. It was seeing a screensaver. One time I saw a screensaver, and the other time it was a mirror and I could see myself. And so as I was being terrified, I could see my face contorting, and it was very off-putting. But I hope I can explain this correctly. Instead of seeing something playing out before my eyes, like the whole room, it was like I was looking through, you know how in movies when they're looking through binoculars, they shoot it where you can only see like through two circles. I could only see through the shape of my sleep mask. So I was seeing something visual, and everything around the shape of that sleep mask was black. It was blacked out. It was almost like it was a green screen.
Wow.
So for decades and for centuries, we've been sleep paralysis. You're waking up in your bedroom. And then we got a little more savvy and we're like, no, we're in the astral realm. And now I'm kind of wondering, we humans are pretty stupid in comparison to these things. We're easily duped. And so I'm thinking maybe we're all wrong. Maybe this is more of like a Total Recall thing or a Matrix thing where we're all laying down in some chamber somewhere with something stuck to us. And I don't mean that
jars on a shelf and
we thought about this as well. Yes.
So
the reality that we remember.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if all of these experiences, are literally just technological experimentation. Like we are the beta, the beta testers, right? So they've got this technology for hacking the brain, and we've all heard about, Elon Musk and his neural lace and all this stuff that's coming and probably already out there. And so the fact is, maybe we, like in Total Recall, like Schwarzenegger was like, he didn't remember that he had showed up at Total Recall and paid money and bought that simulation, right? And so he had to kind of come out of that dream within a dream, this whole Inception thing. And so it makes me wonder if, and this is another one of those brick walls where we don't want to go through it, because a lot of us that have had these spiritual experiences, it does make us feel special. It makes us feel chosen. It makes us feel like we might have some sort of purpose, or we're being, we're helping someone, or, and it could just be, what if, and I'm not chiseling this in stone and putting it in an arc anywhere, guys. I'm really just thinking out loud here. What if we're just a bunch of stupid human beings and they are using us as just beta testers for their technology, some sort of global scale project Bluebeam, where they come down and we're duped because we see what we think we see, we hear what we think we hear, and it's just that all this stuff has been implanted and programmed into us through these experiences. What if every time we have sleep paralysis or we go into the astral room, what if we're not gods? What if we're not special? What if we don't have powers? What if we are just cannon fodder in the biggest global heist ever to be perpetuated upon humankind, and we all march to our deaths because we've all been fooled into thinking we've become some sort of god, and it's not even real. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Lab rats.
Zoo
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah.
Andy says, that's what I mean by becoming non-locational. Rather than going somewhere, are things coming to us. We're no longer in a particular place, realm, of a shared mind, deep collective, unconscious, non-locational.
Yeah.
So instead of going somewhere, maybe this just being presented to us.
Yeah.
So Michael Lynch says, yep.
Yep.
Yes, Dr. Mike.
Yeah, we were just talking about that in the comments. We're like,
Yeah.
zoo theory.
Absolutely, zoo theory. And, I was telling you about that dream I had where I astral projected from within the dream before the show.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the only thing that was like different was when I was in the projection, there was a certain, I could fly. So, the rules of physics or Newtonian physics were applying it to that point. But things had a slight pixelation to them. And I thought, when I finally woke out of the whole thing, I just thought, my God, it's so weird. It's like I went to another level or something, and it seemed sort of Matrix-like, and this is a simulation, right? I find that.
Yeah, look for the glitches, guys. That's going to be your assignment the next time you're in one of the situations. Look for the glitches. Look for the black cats, because they're fascinating. And just as a little disclaimer, you guys, I'm one of those rare people. I don't get triggered. I love to just throw things on the table and be like, oh, what if, and oh, that'd be so cool. I mean, I'm a writer, so I love this kind of thing. So I'm not the type where when someone says something ridiculous, it's like, oh, that goes against what I was raised to believe, So I just know that a lot of this, I'm kind of just, I'm just having fun here. I just love to speculate.
And we just love having a platform where you just speak your mind and you can theorize, because at the end of the day, nobody seems to have all the answers. We've got to have that guest that just comes on and says, oh, by the way, and if they are, we kind of think they're full of shit, because I think we all know that everything. We could just talk about our experiences, right? Because that's what life is, Jeff Taflin, hi
Jeff.
From the GOAT. Hey, Jeff. Ohio, how you doing? Laurie, we love you very much, Miss Vicki.
Thank you.
She had a question in here. We love Laurie. She says, what do you think about people that have had near-death experiences that have explained similar experiences? People, that have had these things happen to them, they have similar stories.
Yep. So I don't know tons about NDEs. I haven't done tons of research on it, but I will tell you, and this is the very first time I kind of had my mind challenged on that, was I have a friend who had one of these near-death experiences, and he's not a kook, he's not crazy. I mean, he was one of these, like, born and raised in the Baptist church singing the hymns, I mean, this is not a guy that would probably even enjoy the conversation we've just had. He probably would think I was a nut if he heard me say half the things I just said. But he had one of these NDEs, and what's hard to deny, because we hear this sometimes people have a vision of like their future life, and they choose to live, and these children, like these unborn children, like appear. And it's one thing, like, well, okay, so you had a kid, who cares? But like when they look exactly the same, and things like that. And so I absolutely think that NDEs are 100% legitimate and that people are experiencing them. The thing with all of this, and I'm challenging my own experience, because I mean, I've had sleep paralysis, 100% real, and my experiences mirror thousands of others of people I've never talked to, I've never exchanged notes with. So obviously something's going on and it's very real. The question I'm still trying to muddy through is, are these experiences what we think they are? That's my question. So language, I mean, I was an English major and I love language, and for as amazing as it is, it's also very frustrating, because as a communicator, you realize how incompetent words really are to communicate really anything, and so I think with NDEs, I absolutely believe that they're legitimate and that it's a spiritual, supernatural experience. What I'm not sure about is if the word near death experience is a proper way to explain what's going on. Just like I'm not sure when I have sleep paralysis, am I in my room or am I in the astral, or is it both, or are there many different answers? If every single one of us had a near-death experience every year, so everybody, had one of these experiences, and we could communicate them clearly, and we could say everything, that we remembered everything, and we could clearly communicate to one another. My question would be, would any of us collectively still know anything about death? So in other words, what I'm saying is, we're calling it a near-death experience because we're seeing some sort of heavenly place, or we're seeing angels, or we're seeing God, or we're seeing grandma. And so again, it's kind of like your question earlier, Chris. Do you think the things that appear to us are appearing in the form that's the most makes the most sense to us? So Christians see demons, and atheists might see, a spirit guide, or it's the same thing. When we see certain things, like, okay, I see gates. I see big golden gates, and I see things with wings, and then I see my grandma who's died. We then collectively put those dots together and say, I must be in heaven because that's where my grandma is. And there's gates there. And even though, because I always learned in church that there's angels and St. Peter's the gates, but we're just guessing all this stuff. Like, death might not look anything like we've ever imagined. Heaven might not look, if any of us showed up in heaven today, we wouldn't know where we were. Nobody knows what it looks like. And scripture even says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, it has never even entered into a thought in the imagination of man what is prepared for those in heaven. So what I'm wondering is, these near-death experiences, I think that they're legit, and I think it's spiritual realm communication, but I'm not entirely sure if it really has anything to do with the actual experience of dying. Like, when we actually die, are we going to see the things that we're seeing in these near-death experiences? That's the part that I'm unclear on.
An expectation. I think it's a great area to think about and question. I know certain abductees have come back and said, well, the alien said, oh, I look this way because I pulled it from you, right. So you could understand, what they were looking at.
Which circles back around to your astral projection of when you were a child and what the seed that was planted by your doctor.
Yes. And the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Black hole. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to see that again. I wrote it down.
I know.
I haven't seen that freaking years. Yeah.
It'll be so cheesy. It'll be so cheesy if we watch it again. It was so scary back then.
Yeah.
Well, Close Encounters would have been a big movie then.
Yeah.
We just recently watched that. There's so many things in that movie that are kind of more accepted now. We talk about on here about those aliens, their effect on people, and the telepathic communication that goes on. Anne-Marie mentioned that telepathy earlier, and that does seem to be
actually we were talking about this with our friend Lorianne and Greg Koss and Reginald Randall earlier about telepathic communication between loved ones and spirits and things. So we had a group conversation going with that.
Yeah. Says good answer. And then Carol says,
Yeah.
I've had so many events of sleep paralysis, and so have both my daughters, to where we are held down and we can't yell for help or even waking up. Now, there is a thing, all right, the science that we do know about sleep paralysis is that when the body goes to sleep, certain chemicals are released, and you get in this very comfortable
Yes.
position, so you don't, hurt yourself while you're asleep and that sort of thing. The limbs can kind of go, numb in a way.
Right.
Feel them. Where does it cross over from that to being something more?
Yeah. So I make this distinction in the book too. I say technically, when we're talking about sleep paralysis, what we're technically talking about is a sleep paralysis episode, because we all have sleep paralysis every night as we go in and out of sleep. When we get into those deep realms of REM sleep, our physiology naturally shuts down. It's a protective measure. If we didn't shut down, we would largely act out our dreams. And so we'd be kicking people and we'd be falling out of bed. We'd sleepwalk. We might get out into the street. We'd wet the bed. I mean, all this stuff kind of shuts down for our protection. And so, where it changes, and again, this is kind of where we all start to speculate, because I don't think we are waking up or that we're in our room. And this is kind of where it gets into the whole similarity with UFO abductions. I do think that the sleep paralysis experience might be an abduction scenario. But here's where it gets, again, they're so clever. A lot of people who have had the UFO experience, they don't immediately remember anything that happened, but they know something happened because they have this missing time. That's the giveaway. Mm-hmm. And so sleep paralysis becomes even more diabolical, because most of us, when we go to bed, we'll sleep 4 to 8 hours. When you wake up 4 hours later or 8 hours later and you look at your alarm clock and 8 hours have gone by, no one's like, oh, I have missing time, because we're asleep. So we're not going to know if we had missing time at night, typically. And so
True.
One thing that I'm sort of speculating, this isn't in the book because this is stuff that I've been researching since the publication, but one thing that I have been examining in the last few weeks is, and this was one of my brick walls, guys. This is one of those brick walls I hit and I'm like, cognitive dissonance hit in. I'm like, nope. Like it took me a couple weeks to even be ready to think about it. Because when you've gone through sleep paralysis your whole life, and it's hard enough to get your mind around the little bit that did happen and how scary that is. So if someone says, hey, it actually might be this big, you're like, nope. But it's very interesting what you said, Chris, about how you had an experience where deep in REM sleep, you astral projected. And I've had that experience many, 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 many times. Usually when I have the premonition, oh crap, I'm about to have sleep paralysis. Oh no, here it comes. I'm dreaming it. I'm not awake, and I'm nowhere near awake. And a lot of times my experiences start deep in REM. And so imagine, let's parallel this with the UFO abductee experiences. What if you're being abducted in your sleep during the REM state? You're being brought to the astral or whatever laboratory or whatever. And I don't think it's the same. I don't think sleep paralysis experiences are genetic experiments or anything like that. I think it's more of a transformational classroom. I think it's where people are being spiritually educated into the religion of the coming kingdom. That's what I think. Because we've all been in the Christian thought prison for the last 200 years, right? So they need to get us deprogrammed. They need to get us out of this sort of church model. We need to learn this new aspect of spirituality. And so I do think that the people that get abducted into the astral realm are it is, like Clive Barker said, this transformational process. And in fact, look at the people throughout history in the 18th and 19th century who have astral projected. They've shaped our entire culture. The Blavatskys and the Baileys and the Lovecrafts and the Baums, Baum, Frank Baum. Galen, the super surgeon of the 2nd century, was in the Asclepions. I talk a lot about the Asclepions in the book too. These astral projectors who have come back with science and medicine and literature and religion, they've shaped our entire culture. So it is a transformational classroom, I believe. But anyway, getting back to the abduction theory, if we're abducted during an REM phase and we're brought into the astral and we're being taught things, or we are entering into covenants, and then we wake up and we have no trigger of missing time to alert us that maybe something happened. And many of us, even who aren't astral projecting or don't have sleep paralysis, a lot of us wake up and we don't remember our dreams, or we'll remember a little bit of it, but we don't remember 2 hours worth of our dreams. So we already know that it's like morning snow when you wake up and you see snow all over, and then by the time you get to your car, it's all melted already because the sun came out, and it's this futile, like, just mist that goes away. And so if we are in the astral and that memory is wiped, the same way UFO abductees and experiencers say they have no memory of what happened until there's some sort of regression or some sort of hypnotism involved, how many of us who have had sleep paralysis our whole life have been in the astral, interacting with these things, being taught, with zero memory. So this part that we remember, I wake up in my room and I can't move, and I'm trying to wiggle my toes, or I'm trying to say the name of Jesus, or whatever you do to get out of that. It's possible that is actually the tail end of the experience, not the whole experience itself. So if you've been in the astral, your mind doesn't remember, but your body, physiologically, our body holds on to trauma. So for example, if I get into a car accident when I'm asleep and I wake up and I have no idea that I was in a car accident, the blood coming down from my forehead is going to indicate to me that the body remembered something happened, and so it's kind of the same thing. As we are waking up, we have no memory of what just happened, but our body is still holding on to all of that trauma and that terror. So we're waking up feeling all of this fear. And it takes a second for the body to catch up and wake up, because we're still in that paralyzed state physiologically. So I don't think that there's demons holding us down. That part where we're paralyzed and we can't talk, I don't think there's anything supernatural in that. That's the physiology. But we're waking up so quickly that there's a glitch. And so our body that's remembering everything that went up there is thinking like, oh no, it's still happening. It's still happening. These beings are still here. But my theory is that we're up in the astral. We've been abducted. Something's going on there. Some sort of experimentation or teaching or covenants are being made. And we're waking up very quickly before we have our movement. And we're instinctively, out of fear, crying out for someone to help us, whether it's our spouse or our mommies or our God, right? And then we're like, oh, phew, that was close. Oh, that was close. Oh my gosh, they almost got me. But, and this is where I tell Christians, you can't get cocky about this stuff. Like, oh, sleep paralysis happens to me all the time, and I call in the name of Jesus, and it stops like that. It's like, well, yeah, that's great. But how do you know that something didn't happen for an hour or two while you were asleep that you have no memory of? And so we can't get cocky about this stuff, because, I don't think human beings are that easy to fool. Anyone who has children, who are screaming and crying, and we trick them into the like, well, we'll give you a piece of candy if you stop crying right now. And we think we're so smart, right? No, it's very, very easy to, I think, manipulate us, and I think that we're advanced. I think we're highly spiritual beings. We're highly intelligent. Even just this conversation we're having in the chat, obviously we're capable of high levels of theory and understanding, but we don't know what we're dealing with. And some of these beings, even in their fallen state, are more diabolical than we have presumed. And I just think that this idea that we wake up and oh man, I felt I couldn't move for a few minutes there, and that sure was scary. Thank God that's over. Most people who have had sleep paralysis will tell you that even after the event is over, for hours, sometimes days later, they feel something hovering. They feel some attachment or some oppression, or they're looking over their shoulder, or they're scared to go to bed the next night. And is that just because it was really scary, or is something still there? Is there now something attached that needs to be,
Right.
I don't think it's enough to just say go away, because we get back into the vampire lore again. You can't just say go away. Once you've invited a vampire in, it now has jurisdiction. They're legalistic. You can say go away and they might leave, but you've granted them legal jurisdiction to your threshold, so they can come back whenever they want. So the goal isn't make it stop. The goal is, how do I undo this contractual threshold agreement that I have made if I don't want this thing coming back? And again, you can, if you couple the chocolate and the peanut butter, and that is you take vampire lore along with the Bible, there's some very clear giveaways as to how to undo these invitations and get out of these contracts. And in vampire lore, there's two ways out of a contract with a vampire. You can die. He can get you and you can die. Death always breaks the contract, right? The second way that you break a vampiric contract is the ownership of the home can change hands because they're legal. And deeds to homes are legal documents. When that signature is no longer yours, they don't have right to that property anymore. Now they have to dupe the new owner if they want to keep coming into that house. Now this gets complicated because we are thresholds, we have thresholds. And so if they have an invitation over the threshold of our soul or our pineal gland, how do you change the ownership of your own body?
Wow,
And this is where I think Christianity has done a really, really poor job advertising their wares. They make it out to be like, oh, you pray a little prayer and you go from a really sad, pathetic person to super happy. And now you wake up every morning, and you can't wait to jump out of bed and hug people. And it just gets so comically juvenile that all you do is pray this little prayer and your whole entire life becomes problem free. And so what that whole concept comes from, this praying to ask Jesus into your heart, where that comes from is Revelation 3:20. It's a threshold covenant. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door and lets me in. And so that's talking about the heart, the temple, now we're the temples of the Holy Spirit and we invite him into our heart. Inviting him into our heart is an acknowledgement that he's crossing over the threshold. And then the Apostle Paul talks about dying to the old man, and that's what baptism is. You're dying and being buried. And this, again, dying breaks a covenant. You're dying and now you're living. You're a new person. That means that the ownership of your temple has changed hands. It revokes all other covenants. So there's more going on there than just pray a prayer and Jesus is your new best friend.
So it sounds like you're saying that the people themselves, humans, or at least our consciousness, may be the commodity that the aliens / gods and goddesses / demons are really after. Like they're trying to steal our consciousness.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of different aspects. Like I've heard people talk about they want your soul, they want your life, they want your conscious. And I think it's really the same thing that the God of the Bible wants. They want our unadulterated worship. But they do it in a dishonest way. They do it by saying, oh, you can be the God and we're going to make you into the God. But unfortunately, the serpent said that to Adam and Eve in the garden, I'm going to give you all this knowledge and you're going to be like a God. And he didn't keep his promise because Adam and Eve, as far as I know, they're not still alive. They died, which means they were corruptible. So the serpent couldn't keep that promise. And so I don't know why lackeys who are less in power than him are somehow going to figure out how to keep that promise. And so what they ultimately want is a transference of worship from the creator God over to a third heaven worship to a second heaven worship, so to speak.
Interesting. Worship being an interesting word, because what is worship really, right? It's you're putting your intentions and thought specifically into one particular place, right?
Yeah.
we've talked about lots of times on our show where we had a paranormal experience and kind of led down a rabbit hole of trying to find out who a particular person may have been or what we were talking to. Something which also used that word hybrids a lot.
Yes.
This it was the same being, same voice, the same kind of phrases we were getting a lot on in EVP and spirit box work, ITC work. We became obsessed on it, and sure as heckany, our homes became haunted, and it got a little out of control. And the only way we could really banish it, traditional banishings were not working at all, was really to take it off our minds.
Yep.
So in a certain reversed way, we were worshiping this entity because it was on our minds. Though we unintentionally did it, we didn't want to, but we were obsessed with it. That obsession and thought, I always thought maybe the thought was like a sort of energy we were giving it, because once we cut it out and we got away from it, and we just didn't do anything paranormal for a while, didn't do any investigations.
And then when we did, we went and did something totally different.
Yeah, and the phenomena in our homes decreased.
Wow.
It finally went away, and I felt like we broke this attachment.
Yes,
it had been attached to us, and it didn't seem to matter, which one. It was both of us, and together apart, we were kind of haunted by it. So
wow,
it's interesting to use the word
it
worship.
Was dark
right?
too. It
Because
wasn't.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a worship and an obsession, or just put all that mental energy into it?
You're right. Fascinating. Wow, that I've never heard anything like that before. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a way to tie that back, I guess, to the paranormal. Carol had asked if you thought that sleep paralysis runs genetically.
Genetically.
I absolutely believe that it can. Going back to what I said earlier about bloodlines, if you go all the way back to, like, if we're going to talk about a seed war, we're going to talk about a cosmic war. This goes all the way back to Genesis, where the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent. Now, the Christian take on it, let's pull everything supernatural out of the Bible, is that Eve would have a baby, and through multiple generations, it would one day turn into someone giving birth to Jesus, and Jesus would crush the head of Satan. That's kind of the biblical explanation. But let's think about this logically for a second. She gave birth to Cain and Abel, and Cain, who is the father of the Canaanites, who, historically, they were the ones at war with God's people. They were the ones that, the Nephilim came through Cain. A lot of the Gnostic texts came through descendants of Cain, Enoch 2 and 3, things like that. So Abel dies, right? So it doesn't make sense that the seed of the woman, the initial seed of the woman, was going to be the ones that come and crush, because it would have had to have been Cain's seed, because he was the only one left living. And he was a seed that was going to get crushed. So when Seth came along, there is a very controversial doctrine. It's called the serpent seed doctrine.
Okay.
The whole story about Adam and Eve, we have two naked dudes in a garden with a tree, and the whole entire plan of God and the destruction of the earth is because they ate a piece of fruit, right? Okay. But now let's go to seed, because this is the whole prophecy about how this cosmic war is how these contracts are going to be undone, is through the seed. Okay, so this goes to bloodlines, this goes to families. So this goes to the question. The serpent seed theology or theory is that fruit is often the nice little euphemism that the Bible uses for progeny, the fruit of the loins, that sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. Like where it says Adam knew Eve. Well, we know that meant that they had sex, but we have to use these Victorian terms because, we can't ever say a dirty word. Right. So the serpent seed doctrine is that this serpent, which was not a snake, it was a seraphim, it was a shining one. If you just go into the Hebrew and you unpack that word, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't a snake bopping around on its tail, it was a seraphim. And The reason why they weren't alarmed that he was walking around or talking is because he wasn't an animal. He was part of the divine council that they sat on. Adam was familiar with the seraphim. He knew what they looked like. They
kind
were,
of angel.
yeah, they were colleagues, right? Like, so they were like, this wasn't anything unusual to them. And so the serpent seed theory is that the species on the divine council weren't supposed to intermingle, no interracial dating up there, right? And so the fruit that was actually being offered to Eve wasn't an actual tree. And again, tree is another big, it's a metaphor in scripture for houses and families and bloodlines. The olive tree is real. And again, these are all cleverly packaged, euphemisms.
Yeah.
But if the fruit that he was offering was, we can have this little interracial fling. And so Eve tried it and was like, wow, yeah, that really was good. But then Adam was like, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. And his eyes were opened. And then he was like, well, I want to try that. And so then he has a go at Eve, right? This is so how it goes. So what ends up happening is, the theory then is that the seed of Cain was literally, not metaphorically, but was literally the seed of this seraphim. And, then a lot of Christians say like, no. Because the angels like, no. But years and years later, we see the angelic host doing it again. We see the watchers coming down and copulating with women. Where'd they get that idea? Maybe they got it from the serpent.
Sure.
Maybe it had been done before. So all this to say, the prophecy of how all of this is going to be undone and made good again is that the seed of Eve would crush the seed of the serpent. Meaning it's a seed war. It is a cosmic war between two bloodlines, the bloodlines of Cain and the bloodlines of Seth. But then you go to the fathers, it's a war between man, Adam, and a war between the serpent, who was the father. So we now have the serpent. Now Adam gets replaced because Adam is no longer on the divine council. He gets kicked out of the garden. And later on, Jesus takes that place as the mediator between God and man. So now the seed war is the Jesus of the Bible, and the serpent, whoever these two characters are. And both characters have been severely misrepresented in and outside of the church. Neither one of them are who we're being told they are. This is a cosmic war between two bloodlines, with Christ being the father of the Adamic or Sethian bloodline, and the serpent being the father of the Canaanite bloodline. So what I find is a lot of times when people have sleep paralysis and they're like, why am I being attacked? Why am I being targeted? If you really get into the nitty gritty, when, you're meeting with them and you're counseling and you're going through the questionnaire, you know what to ask. A lot of people will find in their family history some sort of affiliation to some sort of a secret society. And don't even think modern, like, oh, the Masons. What I'm talking about is you go all the way back to the antediluvian secret societies. These were scary folks. These were the dragon courts. These were the ring lords. Don't think Tolkien came up with the ring lords. Totally. Come on, man. These were ancient secret societies. If you want to have an absolute orgasm on this topic, you guys read Gary Wayne's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. It's a tome. It's huge, but it'll blow your mind. It's amazing. So anyway, these Egyptian pharaohs and these people that carried on these blood drinking cults, which again is where we get our modern vampire lore, but it goes all the way back to the dragon blood drinking courts, where they weren't the life force, and this is where we get vampires, that they're sucking the blood because they're sucking the life force. So Chris, this gets into, do they want your conscious? Do they want your soul? In the ancient blood drinking cults, they were drinking the blood of virgins, and much like the adrenochrome that we hear about today, it had life extending properties. It was the fountain of youth, right? And there were all sorts of things that they knew how to do with their technology. And, this is why we see a lot of things and that are left behind by history, like these dolmens. Well, those were just graveyards. And you read up on those dolmens and talk about, those could actually prolong life. It was a whole thing of harnessing lightning into ball lightning, and they would use the jeds, the DJED, the Egyptian jed, which is a sign for vitality or duration.
They have that supposedly in the king's chamber, is what that actually is in the pyramid.
In the
In the Great Pyramid. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So I think to this day, a lot of the people that I've run into and I've had in-depth talks with, and and myself included, if you get down to the brass tacks, and I'm sorry it's taking me so long to answer your question, but a lot of people will be able to trace their bloodline back to one of these bloodlines, or back to the bloodline of the House of David, because the House of David is also under attack, because God said that he would bless David and all of his generations forever and ever and ever. And obviously through David's line came the Messiah. And so I find that a lot of times, and this is why Christians and non-Christians, or religious and non-religious people alike, both experience this, because it is two bloodlines. And as they don't just want to maintain control of their own bloodline, but they would like to usurp and gain control of the Davidic bloodline as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So really, you're saying the spiritual warfare goes back to certain bloodlines. I know one of the things we're talking about with a good doctor,
Michael Lynch, who's in our
chats
chat
on Thursday, was about there always being a sort of 1%, right? And a lot of people theorize that the world is controlled perhaps by certain bloodlines. Do you think that plays a role into what you're telling us now?
Absolutely. And again, the more sophisticated we get, and kind of the more we figure out, and a lot of this stuff, we were talking earlier about the movies, and it's amazing if you go back and watch some of those movies that were out in like the 70s. You're like, I can't believe how much they were giving away. But back then we weren't looking for it. But now that we're looking for it, and as more and more things come out of the bag, and I think people are figuring things out that they're not supposed to figure out. So what they have to do then is they have to kind of control the narrative. And so now we hear stuff about the Illuminati and the Rothschilds and all this stuff that they put out there. But the 1%, these are not people seeking attention, and even in Satanism, I try to, tell people, I do a show with Tom Dunn called Through the Black. We're on like 6 nights a week, and we talk about, there's a difference between, like, there's so many different kinds of Satanism, but like the generational Satanism, like the guys you should really be afraid of, the ones who really know what they're doing and know how to tap into the power. Those aren't the guys walking around in Metallica t-shirts with their nose pierced. I mean, these are not guys looking for attention, right? And I always tell Christians, I say, the generational Satanists, the ones that you should be terrified of, they're your kid's Sunday school teacher. And I mean, I'm not joking. You would never guess who the real ones are. And so it's kind of the same thing too with these bloodlines. They throw a bunch of people out there at us so that we can shake our fists at, Jay-Z and Beyonce and, the Rothschilds and, all these people. But you would never know who the real people are. They're not looking for attention. They're not looking for 15 minutes of fame. They're looking to they have an agenda, and they don't want to be interrupted.
Right.
They're kind of like taming the masses with that. What gets us, like, we think about things like war, and these wars that seem to be created historically over seemingly trivial things, and at the cost of, millions of lives, over time, or maybe not even. Like, who can make those decisions to say, all right, start a draft and all these people go fight that war. Say like the Ukraine, we've got the flag up in the corner. It's been up there since that war started. Russia now has a draft going, and like it almost seems inhuman to make those choices, right? To not really care about human life at all, even with the knowledge that, all right, we're going to lose, so many tens of thousands of people over this,
it's okay.
I get a port, in Ukraine. Like it seems non-human to me. Like a human just even do that.
I am so glad you said that, Chris. So I'm about to go full spook on everybody. So you guys have to read the Book of Enoch. I mean, it's just so amazing. Whether you believe it or not, whether it's canon or not, it doesn't matter. It's an amazing text. But anyway, in the Book of Enoch, Samyaza is like the head of the coup. He's the guy that convinces the other 199 to come down with him, right? And so he's the leader of the coup, but he's really not the leader, because when you get about 8 chapters into Enoch, all of a sudden they're talking about Azazel, right? And I think that the reason why you don't hear about Azazel until chapter 8 is because I think he is the Lucifer character. Okay, there's no such thing as Lucifer. That it just is Latin for light bearer. It's not a name. We don't know the name, the cherub that covered the glory of God in heaven before he fell, whatever his name is, that covering cherub who usurped God and fell like lightning from the sky. I believe that is Azazel. And I think the reason why he wasn't part of the coup on Mount Hermon was because he was already on Earth. And the reason these watchers even knew that it was possible to come down and dwell in this dimension and influence man is because somebody had already done it. So Azazel shows up in chapter 8. Azazel is not credited with or punished for mating with the women. He's punished for teaching man the mysteries of heaven. That might be around chapter 11. He is being punished for teaching the secrets of heaven to man. Now, there's 2 interesting things about these secrets that he taught man. One, they're called the worthless secrets of heaven. And then it indicates that he left heaven before he learned everything to be learned. But he was learning kind of like the basic 101 stuff it's called the worthless secrets of heaven. But those were good enough for him. He's like, this stuff's awesome. And he fell. And so when he was down on earth, then he taught these worthless mysteries to man. And what this was like root cutting, cosmetics, forging war weapons. And if you go to the whole pantheon of every god or goddess that's ever been out there, they're all gods and goddesses of sex and war. And it all goes back to these things that we learned. They were the mysteries of heaven. We learned the art of seduction. We learned the art of pharmakia. We learned the art of war and weaponry. So though even this war in the Ukraine now, if you trace that back all the way to the origin of how man ever came up with that, it was taught to us by a fallen angel named Azazel, who was punished for teaching us those things. Where is he now? Azazel didn't get destroyed in the flood. He was put in the abyss. He was put in Tartaru. And this is all the way deep and deep. It's deeper than Sheol. It's deeper than hell. It goes all the way down Tartaru. And he is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when Jesus died and he went 3 days into the bowels of the earth, the church teaches that he went and met with Abraham and all the pre-Christian Christians and said, yay, we won. No, he wasn't in Sheol. He went all the way down into Tartaru, because when he died, he earned the keys to sin and death. So in other words, the keys, he now earned those keys through his blood. He went all the way down, used that key, opened up Tartaru, went to Azazel and said, game over. I win. I just rose from the dead, throat punch, locked him back up. Okay. So that is what's going on there. So now this goes all into the occult stuff of as above, so below, and the whole occult laws of reversal. They do the opposite of everything. So you've got Jesus now seated at the right hand of God the Father in the highest of the heavens in this throne room. And then you've got Azazel, the covering cherub who fell like lightning, not in the astral, not on earth, not in Sheol, the lowest of the lowest of the lowest throne. So when they say as above, so below, let's flip these kingdoms so that our throne room is the ruling kingdom. It's all about kingdoms. It's all about seed. It's all about this cosmic war. And so all that to say, when you say, Chris, that who is powerful enough on earth to pull a string and make a decision to start a war where millions of lives are at stake and economies are at stake and livelihoods are at stake and finances are at stake. And you hit the nail right on the head, because the person directing those orders, I believe, is Azazel, because he is locked up. But we know, even as human beings, we have ways to get into the astral and communicate with ascended masters. So you think that Azazel, with all his power, doesn't have ways of communicating with his
Of course he does.
people up here? Of course he does. So that's who I think is pulling the strings. And he's got cronies, and he's got 1% of really powerful cronies. But he is, I think, ultimately the one with the marionette strings attached to him.
Wow, that is totally interesting.
It is.
I love that.
That's a picture of a seraphim that I put out. There's many winged creatures.
We have done a show on that.
We did. What
nice.
angels look like, and you look at them and what the biblical references are, because they seem like something. They're definitely not human looking in all cases.
They got the
right?
3-4
When you
faces.
talk about seraphim, you'll see that. You see things like that in Greek mythology. You see it in descriptions of demons. If you look at the demons of the Goetia, that sort of thing, Ars Goetia, and the people that paint the pictures of the descriptions, you see hybrids of animals and people kind of combined. I find that all very fascinating. That's something non-human.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And,
one of the things that a lot of people have trouble with, and rightfully so, I had a grandmother who never really wanted to be religious because it bothered her so much. How can this loving God tell his armies to go in and wipe out whole villages, including the children and the animals? Like, that is so cruel. And this is a Jenga piece I'm talking about. If you take out Genesis 6 and you just say that sons of Cain were marrying sons of Seth, and it was just like some cousins marrying cousins. If you miss out the supernatural piece that these were watchers mating with women and that they were giving birth to demigods, if you miss out on that, then you miss out in the days of Noah, where God said every single thing on this planet has been corrupted except for Noah, who's perfect in his genetics, in his bloodline, in his generations. So I'm going to save the one thing that hasn't been corrupted. Then it makes sense now when whole villages are being wiped out, is wiping out genetic anomalies. He's wiping out these animals and these all like the centaurs and all of like the abominations, and the demonic blood, and he's wiping out the demonic seed. And so it's not that he just went into a village and started murdering all the babies. And so, but that is never going to make sense if in seminary your pastor has been taught to pull Genesis 6 out of the narrative. Nothing in the Bible will make sense if you don't have the correct interpretation of Genesis 6.
And people are very selective in what they want to take from the Bible, right? I mean, they're not going to talk about the, let's give them our firstborn son. Yeah, things like that.
Yeah.
They go, that isn't evil, all right? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
Michael says Moses was not talking to God.
Well, I don't know where Michael's going with that, but this is another thing that they don't teach you in Scripture. But a vast majority of the Old Testament passages where Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, is being cited, that we interpret God as like God the Father. If you go back to the Masoretic text and you look at the vowel leanings, because they wanted to preserve the pronunciations and the languages, Yod He Vav He was God the Father, and Yod He Vav He was the pre-incarnate Messiah. They had the same exact name, and it was based upon the pronunciation where you could differentiate between the two. And I think, the Masoretic has Yehovah as God the Father and Yehovah as the pre-incarnate Messiah. And most people think that Yehovah is God the Father. Yehovah is actually the pre-incarnate Messiah. And many of these Bible stories that we learned as kids, where it's God they're actually interacting with the pre-incarnate Messiah, not God the Father. There's only 2 times in the entire Bible where human beings hear the voice of God the Father. 2 times.
That's it.
Interesting. Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah. You'd have
Yeah.
What is it? It's only like 4 letters, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's
Yep.
spelled.
And it's hard also to translate all that into our English language. So
Yeah.
of course there's going to be other things in it that weren't translated right.
Sure. And we know that if like you don't have a word for something, like we learned this about the color blue. You know, lots of cultures didn't know how to describe blue because frankly they didn't have a word for it. They thought it was a shade of black.
Yep.
Yes, I remember that.
More words for a particular color, they're more apt to be able to distinguish between the shades, even when they're very close, because the brain kind of builds a connection that's beyond the vocabulary.
Eyes, right.
You know, it's been exposed to it, which is fascinating.
I'd love to have a panel with her.
Michael
the good
says,
doctor, Michael.
Yeah.
And,
he says Jehovah was not God, he was pleaded. So yeah, there you go. There's our alien coming around again, and there seems to be so many connections. One other thing I wanted to comment on before you talked about time loss, and it's such a common thing that abductees talk about. You know, you mentioned it with dreaming, you know, and that maybe in the sleep paralysis there was something that happened before and we don't remember. And of course, right, because when somebody monitors your dream, you're put into those REM states and you've got the wires hooked up to your brain there, they know that your dream is only like in our perception, you know, a couple seconds or something like that, where you may have dreamt this like epic story that went on for weeks, right? And you can retain it all. That shows that there doesn't seem to be like any kind of time. And I wanted to ask you, like, when you've had astral experiences, do you find this to be true? Because we have, is that there is no time on that side. It doesn't seem to matter. You think and everything is just instantaneous. There's no sense of time at all.
Yeah. I think most of my astral experiences, I think I was so blind to what was going on for so long that I would have to go back now in retrospect and say, now, was that a dream or was that astral? And the couple astral experiences that I know for sure were, one of them I was not lucid in it at all, but when I woke up, I was like, I knew exactly what that was. But the 2 that are the most clear to me were very, very unpleasant. I don't, you know, I don't get all the good stuff, you know, like where people go up there and they have spirit guides and wonderful counsel and meet up with friends and have a good time.
Yeah.
Be something that's kind of terrifying, right? Old hag syndrome, right? They call it a syndrome. I'm not sure why, but so many people have experienced it. I include myself as seeing the crone as the archetype like figure, and it's fascinating to me that so many people would have the same experience, you know, whether or not they were, you know, aware of it or ever heard of it. This stuff is great. I love this topic, and we've run to almost 10 o'clock. I know we went a little further. I know it's
awesome.
Probably like, hey, I signed up for the 2-hour program. What's going on?
I was just thinking the same thing you were.
But, I want people to know how they can get your book and everything. I hope you don't mind that we kept you a little later.
No, it's been great.
And you know,
thank you. Yeah, it's a wonderful discussion.
So fun.
I didn't even realize it was that time till like just now. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, I just looked crap. She's probably like, when the hell can I get off of this?
No, I've loved it, and I've really enjoyed having the live chat too, and just getting other people's experiences and ideas and perspectives, and it was a blast.
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Glad. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll have to do this again. I'm very interested in your book. Can you tell us the best way to get it? Some people only hear this as a podcast. So,
yeah, sure. Yep. So it's called They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis. It is available exclusively on lamarzulli.net. It is not out on Amazon. We are working on a Kindle version, especially for our overseas people. I've had a lot of people from England and Canada and Australia and South Africa in particular wanting to get their mitts on it, but shipping is so expensive. So we are working on a Kindle, but until then, lamarzulli.net.
Best place to get it. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, this is again, this has been great.
Wonderful. Yes.
I really
thank you.
enjoyed our conversation, and I'd love to have another one in the future.
Anytime.
You stay in
Please,
touch with us. And
I feel like there's so many other topics.
I know. I think we could
Yeah,
just talk about this till the
Yeah,
sun.
I know. We can do one where I don't have to promote a book and we don't have to limit it to sleep paralysis.
Sure,
Cool.
absolutely.
That would be awesome. Yes.
Mm.
Anytime you want. The door is open. So thank you so
Sweet.
much, Vicki Joy Anderson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is there a website you want people to go to find out more about you in general?
Sure. Yeah, you can go to vickijoyanderson.com. And there's a contact page on there too if anyone wants to get a hold of me.
Excellent. Wow, this has been great.
Yes.
I want to thank
again.
everybody that joined us tonight. Barbara, Carol, Anne-Marie Young, Dr. Michael Lynch, Greg Koss, Reginald, everybody, Laurie Ann Sweet, of course. You guys know who you
Stephen
are.
Woodward,
Stephen
Courtney
Woodward.
Peterson, Beth Allen. Yes.
That's right.
Jeff Taft.
Andy Mercer.
Andy, most definitely. Yes. I forgot about Andy. Sorry.
Yeah, those many of you. Jeff the Goat.
Yep.
So yeah, lots of fun. This has been great. Thank you so much. Stick around. We're just gonna wrap up things. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining Bigfoot and the Bunny. And join us next Thursday on Dark Horse Paranormal Podcast, likely on the platform you're watching us now.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend
Bye-bye.
and be safe.